across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good afternoon. Thank you to Julia. 3 minutes after 1 o'clock. Welcome back. It is the home of common sense. We are rammed to the gills at this end. Keir Starmer condemning Israel's renewed Gaza offensive as completely wrong, as Britain has halted trade talks and summoned the ambassador. Meanwhile, the Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, has called it intolerable, abominable and morally unjustifiable. All words that end in BLE. Lots to talk about there. Have Israel gone too far? Seems to be the question people are asking. There's much more to this story. We'll look at the details in a couple of moments. Meanwhile, Prime Minister has signalled a U-turn on plans to scrap winter fuel payments for 10 million pensioners, saying he's now looking at ditching the cuts following a furious public backlash. Will this salvage him? This would have been the one policy that would have hung around his neck literally until the next election. Are they going to scrap it altogether? Are they going to redraw the line of where you can and cannot claim? Details are to follow. And Lucy Connelly's husband has slammed the Court of Appeal's decision for her 31-month prison sentence for inciting racial hatred as shocking and unfair, insisting she's not a right-wing thug. Well, whatever she is, she shouldn't have got 31 months in jail. There is one man who disagrees with me there and thinks it was the right decision. That's Dan Hodges, the journalist and broadcaster. He's with us in about half an hour's time. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk 0344 499 1000. I'm going to look. We'll come back to the Lucy Connelly stuff, by the way, and I do genuinely want to continue to take your calls on this. There are so many theories around what is going on here, from conspiracy theories to issues around left-wing judges to issues around political interference, etc. The world has lost its mind when it comes to free speech. Is it free speech? If you break the rules, should anything go on Twitter? You would never have thought that the words of clearly based on this, someone whose brain was not in first gear, would have resonated in so many areas. And in some respects, by the way, I know there's a sort of a left-wing, right-wing divide on this a little bit, but not exclusively. It's interesting how many other people. We spoke to Chris Dorr, the barrister. Now, Chris Dorr isn't somebody who would ordinarily defend someone in this situation, but he believes this is a complete waste of prison time. And I think we can all agree with that, can't we? I mean, along with other people. It's often from causes that I wouldn't have any affiliation with. You think, oh, why are we sending people to prison for this kind of stuff? Is it about getting a message out there? Has there been a little note sent from high above? Well, none of that is true, but it does force you into that kind of thinking. I get it. So I will continue to take your comments on that, because I genuinely think it's a fascinating, almost a barometer of our times. 0344 499 1000. I do want to talk a bit about Israel. It's not a subject that we always visit, in fact, and there's a reason for this. I spent a lifetime hosting and chairing contentious debates on all sorts of things where two sides will never fully agree. Compromise and the like is simply not part of the deal. But in those 25 odd years, I've not encountered an issue that so fully and unequivocally divides like Israel-Gaza. It's never changed. It's not about to change either. Here's the example I always give, and I don't know how many times I've done this. I'll get two professors on as guests, okay? One with an impressive title and an expert on Middle Eastern history with a major in Palestinian studies. The other, an expert in Middle Eastern history with a major in Israeli studies. They are looking at the same timeline. They are looking at the same events, the same administrations, the same global environment and considerations. They're looking at the same pressures, the same politics, the same scriptures. But they have two completely different views. I mean, completely different. You'd think, well, there's got to be some, really? So it's always a difficult one to get into. But I thought what happened yesterday in the House of Commons was frankly quite shameful from the British government. We know the UK has suspended trade talks with Israel. They've summoned the ambassador. They put fresh sanctions on West Bank settlers, as David Lammy and others called the military escalation in Gaza morally unjustifiable. The move follows warnings of starvation in Gaza after Israel launched a new military operation over the weekend. There are suggestions, although currently unqualified or fully sourced, that 14,000 babies could die in the next 48 hours unless aid gets through. And whilst that's a powerful headline, I'll say it again, currently unqualified words and not fully sourced. But the exchanges in Parliament yesterday were interesting. The Conservative Shadow Foreign Secretary, Priti Patel, suggested the actions would be welcomed by Hamas, but also angry calls for the government to go further. And this is fascinating. I'll have a listen to some of the words here as well. In response, Israel's foreign spokesman said external pressure would not divert Israel from its path of defending its existence. That bit is key. Later in the day, the United Nations confirmed that although permission had now been given to send about 100 aid trucks into Gaza, no aid had yet been distributed. So this was Starmer and Lammy, both in full action yesterday. Keir Starmer called the current situation intolerable, saying humanitarian aid needs to get in at pace. In the House of Commons, there were shouts of shame from MPs as David Lammy set out how an Israeli minister had said their latest operations would be cleansing Gaza, destroying what's left and relocating Palestinians to third countries. Well, this government knows all about third countries. We must call it what it is, David Lammy told MPs. It is extremism, it is dangerous, it is repellent, it is monstrous, and I condemn it in the strongest possible terms. My takeaway from this is rather straightforward. I've never seen David Lammy so on fire and animated and passionate about something, because that is what he really believes. His politics and the politics of half the front bench, if not most of the front bench, exactly is this. They don't like Israel. They've never much liked Israel. They don't stand squarely with Israel. They said it all in opposition. They gave it Billy Big Potatoes every time something like this came. We stand shoulder to shoulder with Israel. This should not be tolerated. They've been invaded. We will make sure we provide every mechanism there is possible in order to help them out on this particular. But actually, and it always looked a bit odd when you had Keir Starmer kind of going further than Rishi Sunak back then. That seemed really strange to me. But of course, the truth really came out yesterday when you have the Foreign Secretary talking about Israel being extremist, dangerous, repellent and monstrous. They're the words he really believes in. He couldn't get enough of saying that. How could anyone seriously side with Gaza and Hamas? I mean, that has to be the question here, doesn't it? An ideology whose sole aim is, well, to eradicate Israel and all Jews. That's the thing. We are talking about a barbaric medieval death cult here. That's what they stand by. They believe their God gives them the diktat and the green light to do this. So October 7th was nothing to them. That's what they were put on this earth to do. Wipe out this filth, in their words, and eradicate the entire state. They will not stop thinking that. What is Israel supposed to do? What is Israel? It's the only country in the Middle East that is democratic, a full ally of us, or it was until Lammy opened his gob yesterday. Who knows where it goes next? But I'm going to ask the question anyway. Have Israel gone too far? I sense this is a country still defending itself. They still have hostages that have been taken. What do we do about aid? Nobody, by the way, in their right mind thinks that every person living in Gaza is responsible for this. These are people that are dictated to, they are oppressed, they have no choice. Every sinew, every dot, every cross, everything that happens in that area happens because of Hamas's say-so. It's a terror-run, brutal regime. It's as simple as that. Just think ISIS with bells on, and that's who's running. That's who you're trying to negotiate with. Let's get a word on this and the other big stories of the day. Chloe Dobbs is back with us. How you doing, Chloe?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Good. Nice to have you with us. Let's start then with a little bit of that speech. This was David Lammy, as I was saying a second ago. I mean, he couldn't get in. He actually found his métier yesterday when he stood there at the dispatch box. This was the real David Lammy. Have a listen.
Netanyahu's government is planning to drive Gazans from their homes into a corner of the Strip to the south and permit them a fraction of the aid that they need. Yesterday, Minister Smodrick even spoke of Israeli forces cleansing Gaza. Destroying what's left of residents, Palestinians, being relocated, he said, to third countries. We must call this what it is. It is extremism. It is dangerous. It is repellent. It is monstrous, and I condemn it in the strongest possible terms.
Now that, Chloe, was the most comfortable I've ever seen David Lammy, because I think he was, and I don't say that as a compliment, but he was speaking what he's always believed.
I mean, David Lammy seems to have come out of his box once again. I think in the year and the lead up to the general election, I definitely think he was told, listen, just be quiet, behave yourself, act like a responsible foreign secretary, no going around saying Trump is some evil fascist and whatnot. I mean, we know what he said in the past, but clearly he's come back out of his shell again. And I understand why you would be concerned about there not being enough aid trucks going into Gaza, because
it's a fair point.
I mean, wars, they are terrible, and nobody likes to see children and civilians starving and dying. It's, you know, it's the brutal reality of war. But why has he stood there calling Israel the extremist? Why hasn't he stood there calling Hamas the extremist? I think time and time again in this war, I'm not saying Israel was perfect, but Israel seems to get the blame for everything. So Hamas, we know Hamas were using people as human shields. Hamas were, when people were told by the Israelis, you need to leave this area because we're going to attack it, they tried to leave. Hamas would shoot them if they tried to leave, because Hamas wanted to keep them there as human shields. Hamas is so brutal and needs to be eradicated, and they very much need to be given the blame for a lot of the, you know, horrible deaths and atrocities in this war. Also, on the point about aid trucks, it is a difficult thing for Israel to decide what to do there, because, I mean, there was a hostage who was released, I can't remember his name, but he spoke about what he saw and experienced there, and he said when the aid trucks came, the Hamas leaders would eat like kings, he said, and take all that they want and use those supplies for themselves, and then they would let people starve. Where is the condemnation of that?
Repellent and monstrous. That's not Lammy talking about his cab driver, by the way. This is him talking about the battle that has gone on for, you know, I mean, decades and decades and decades, of course, but, you know, more recently we know what has been happening. And, you know, I said at the beginning, Chloe, this is a regime, Hamas, that wants to eradicate Israel. They hate Jews, they hate Israelis, they hate the government, they hate the fact that they are in the region, they hate that they're a democracy, they hate that they have a different God, and, you know, goodness me, the list goes on. They will not tolerate it, and, you know, whatever happens here, they will continue in this vein forever. Yeah,
Hamas are very clear what their mission is. Their mission is to eradicate Israel. I mean, you were right to describe them as ISIS with bells. Hamas, let's be clear, they are worse than ISIS. The fact that we've currently got a legal case being brought against the Home Office by them to try and be taken off the prescribed terror list is completely insane. There was an interview with the ex-mayor of Gaza before Israel left Gaza in 2005, and he said, you know, let's be clear, Hamas make ISIS look like lovely people. ISIS are evil and did horrendous things, but they never did things like cook a baby in an oven, or, you know, rape people after they've, you know, killed them, and then, you know, shoot a woman in her parts. I mean, it is absolutely disgusting. And people, you know, all these people that say free Palestine, okay, if you want to free Palestine from oppression, you should be wanting to free them from Hamas. Hamas are the evil ones. Hamas treat the Palestinians far worse than the Israelis ever will.
Yeah, spot on. But do you think Israel have gone too far? That's the point that David Lammy made yesterday. We'll take your calls and comments on that. If you come at this from a Jewish perspective, what is your sense on the latest development in this story? 0344 499 1000. There was a big U-turn today at Prime Minister's Question Time. Keir Starmer has taken, well, I think you call it a massive U-turn when it comes to those winter fuel payments. Let's have a listen to what he said about an hour ago at PMQs.
As the economy improves, we want to make sure people feel those improvements in their days as their lives go forward. And that is why we want to ensure that as we go forward, more pensioners are eligible for winter fuel payments. As you would expect, Mr. Speaker, we will only make decisions we can afford. That is why we will look at that as part of a fiscal event.
Yeah, that's means we got it horribly wrong and we're going to have to change our mind.
Yeah, well, Keir flip-flop Starmer living up to his nickname, but actually flip-flopping in the right direction for once. So on the one hand, this is embarrassing for him to admit that he has made a mistake, but I think, you know, the pressure really has been increasing on him to change this. I think that the tipping point on this very much was the local elections and that Runcorn by-election, because people in the grassroots of the party who were knocking on doors, trying to drum up support, were just hearing on the doorstep, you know, apparently in Runcorn especially, this was just coming up time and time again. One of the, you would have thought it's immigration was the top reason why people were switching to reform, but apparently winter fuel payments just kept coming up time and time again on the doorstep. But I mean, it's interesting to see that's being delivered by Keir Starmer. What does Rachel Reeves think of this? Is Rachel Reeves going to be annoyed? We know there's been a bit of tension between the two of them. For example, when Keir Starmer wanted to increase defence spending after pressure on Trump, and Rachel Reeves is like, oh my gosh, I'm just trying to find any pennies anywhere I can. This is the last thing I need. So be interesting to see what Rachel Reeves thinks of this and how she will factor it in. How's she going to budget it in?
I would loved Starmer to have gone, you know, we've looked at the fuel thing, and it turns out that my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, messed it up. I'd loved him to have said that. Wouldn't that have been a great moment? And Rachel Reeves' face with all the blood oozing from it as she realises she's been given a public kicking. But they're going to cover this up, as he did there, by saying, look, you know, at the time we announced it, we couldn't afford it. If things get better, we can afford it, which is nonsense.
They might spin it as, oh, the economy's doing so well that now we can afford it, when we all know that's a lie.
Of course they will. We'll take comments on that as well. 0344 499 1000. Lines are open. Also, the Lucy Connelly story, we're going to continue to debate that. Dan Hodges with us shortly on that issue after the loss of that appeal yesterday. And, of course, whatever else comes along the way throughout the course of the programme and all the breaking news. Chloe Dobbs is with us. More stories to come next on Talk.
Disgusting. She's clearly a political prisoner, and I think it says something about British society when, you know, sex offenders, perverts and child groomers don't go to prison, but Lucy Connelly is still in prison. It's degradation of our society, and how low can we go? It's terrible. I think it's a stain on our history when things like this happen. Now, and let's face it, you know, I'm a mum myself, and I think any parent out there, the Southport murders of these innocent children affected everybody and every parent.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
22 minutes after 1 o'clock. Let's move on to this story. It's not going away. Lucy Connelly's husband has spoken out after her appeal was denied yesterday. Let's have a listen and a reminder of how this all started. This is her original sentencing back in October.
You used the social media platform, then known as Twitter, to publish the following, quote, "Mass deportation now. Set fire to all the hotels full of the for all I care. While you're at it, take the treacherous government and politicians with them. I feel physically sick knowing what these families will now have to endure. If that makes me racist, so be it." The sentence on count 1, therefore, is one of 31 months imprisonment.
31 months in prison. That's really where the issue is for me. I mean, we can talk about, you know, did this come from up high? Was she, you know, is she a genuine sort of white supremacist or whatever else people want to say? Because I'm seeing those kind of comments. To me, it's a straightforward case. 31 months in jail is way too long for a tweet, no matter how nefarious it might be.
Absolutely, especially at the time when we're having more news coming out of prisons being on the brink of being completely full and not having any spaces left. We're hearing they're probably going to have to do more early releases. Why isn't she top of the list to be let out? We'll probably have some rapist or murderer let out instead of her. And
domestic abusers, all sorts of people.
And the judge that made the decision on this appeal, he is the same judge who happily reduced the sentence of a Rotherham rape gang perpetrator. Okay, that is just the most blatant example of two-tier justice, and there are other grooming gang perpetrators who have, committed the most disgusting crimes, who have, shorter sentences than Lucy Connelly. I mean, what kind of world are we living in where a tweet gets you a worse prison sentence than raping a child? That is just monumentally messed up. I do not understand how on earth they can justify this. Well, I mean, what they've said is she pleaded guilty to inciting violence, but actually she was advised by her lawyer to do that. We know this happens in the courts. People are often advised to plead guilty even when they don't believe they're guilty, because they're told, oh, if you play ball and you plead guilty, then you'll get a shorter sentence. That clearly wasn't the case for her, but they did not buy her argument. And then they had the CPS barrister ask her questions, trying to basically make her look like a racist. So saying, do you admit that you have strong views on immigration? To which she answers, yes, I do. Do you believe that high levels of immigration pose a threat to this country? And she says, along the lines of, yes, I do. And they're basically making this look like in court, oh, yes, she's a racist because she's concerned about immigration. And then, clearly all that questioning convinced them this is a horrible racist who deserves to be behind bars. And this is a woman who has, a lovely daughter. We've got to care about her as well. She's got a daughter who needs to be taken care of. Think of the trauma this is not just causing to Lucy Connelly, but to her daughter. And my understanding is, when this was first reported, it would say she is the carer to her sick husband. I don't know exactly in what way he is sick and how severe, whatever his condition is. But, surely he is now lacking support. If that is the case, she has to be let out of prison. It is just the most ridiculous case of two-tier justice.
But
I hope that this is revisited.
Yeah, and we shouldn't be, we went over a lot of this yesterday. I don't want to see people for tweets going to jail. I don't want to see people who didn't pay their TV licence going to jail. I don't even want to see those half-wits from Just Stop Oil going to jail, frankly. I just think this is a ridiculous use of jail time. I mean, we should... It seems to me, given partly we've got a crisis in our jails, there's just a whole raft of areas where jail is completely the wrong punishment. I'd imagine someone like Lucy Connelly, no one's defending what she wrote. I think we're all quite clear on that. I would imagine the level of humiliation she would have had, and if they stuck an electronic tag on her for 6 weeks, I think that would have probably done the job.
Yeah, I mean, Lee Anderson, he was just telling me the guy who sent him, real genuine death threats online got a 50 quid fine from the police.
50 quid.
So you send death threats to an MP, you get a 50 quid fine, right? But if you write up a tweet like that, which was only up for a few hours, and this is coming from a woman who has diagnosed PTSD because she lost a 19-month-old child when the NHS made a mistake. She was horrified, and her PTSD was very much flared up when she learned that 3 beautiful, innocent little girls had been stabbed. She wrote that tweet, went out, walked the dog, came back and realised, oh gosh, I've made a mistake, deleted it. And that was before the riots started. And when the riots did start, she was then tweeting, condemning and discouraging people from going out and joining those riots. So I just don't know how on earth that judge can go to sleep at night.
Had she left it up there, you could kind of maybe go one step towards going, well, that was a bit silly. But actually, she did take it down. It was 3 hours, 50 minutes later or something crazy like that.
3 to 4 hours later. Yeah. And I highly doubt that tweet of hers caused the riots. I do not think that the attacks we saw on migrant hotels were a consequence of Lucy Connelly's tweet. Absolutely not.
Let's move to this story. A Sun exclusive has revealed that taxpayers are now not only forking out for migrants, but their pets as well. Keir Starmer's Smash the Gangs might be working so well they've had to bring in guard dogs. Let's have a listen to the Prime Minister's pledge in action.
You will have helped to smash the gangs. Take those gangs down. Smashing the gangs. No shortcut. Smash the criminal gangs. No gimmicks. Have to smash those gangs. Just the hard graph of sleeves rolled up. Smash the gangs. Practical government. I think smashing the gangs is a deterrent. We will smash the gangs that undermine our security. Smash the gangs. Smash the people smuggling gangs.
Smash the gangs.
Smash the gangs. Just at the end there, Mr. Lammy being very cool. Nobody's really smashed any gangs, and now it's not just folk coming over in boats, it's dogs as well. A German Shepherd crossed the channel. This extraordinary story from The Sun a little earlier. There it is, barking mad. The boat was packed with migrants and a German Shepherd called Pierre.
Oh, maybe a French German Shepherd then.
I invented that name on the hoof there. I quite like the idea. A little beret on, just to celebrate where he'd come from.
Yeah, well, apparently they've got no idea where this dog came from, which means that they're quite concerned about, could it have rabies or some sort of scary disease.
It's a rabid dog called Pierre.
Yeah, so the dog is having to stay in quarantine for at least 120 days and, of course, needs to have 1 million visits to the vets and whatnot to check it's safe. So as you can imagine, this is proving quite expensive. I mean, the first thing that springs to mind to me was, did the dog have to pay the thousands of pounds to get on the boat, or did the dog have a free ride? I mean, that's quite that's dedication to your dog if you paid double the fare so that you could put your dog on as well. Or maybe the dog was just snuck on and the people smugglers didn't notice.
Maybe the dog just didn't like France and thought, I hate this place.
Yeah.
I really hate this place. Have you ever been to Calais, by the way? You have been to Calais? Yes, of course I have. Yeah, we used to go there on school trips because it was
I hate it. Honestly, I saw it and I thought...
It's a really grim old place, Calais, isn't it? It's not offering up much.
There is no beauty whatsoever. I mean, the architecture there, it all just looks like hospitals and prisons is the
There's no
the
redeeming qualities, architecturally or otherwise.
So I can understand if you were a dog in Calais,
why you'd think... I think the dog just got fed up and thought, look, how did, what did I do in a previous life to end up being a Calais dog? And it probably thought, I've been watching those boats for a couple of years, I'm going to hop on one of those beasts and get over to the UK.
maybe so. I mean, it is an absolutely bonkers story. I mean, I feel a little bit sorry for the dog because clearly the dog didn't make a conscious decision to be on that boat.
It's in the Four Seasons. It gets free dog food, free pedigree chum, free walks.
Lucky dog.
Free bones, free toys.
Lucky dog. Still probably overall cheaper than a human coming here, although the dog won't be able to get a job and contribute to the economy. But I doubt that's the case for many of the migrants either. They claim asylum and then they claim benefits, then they want to bring all their family members over as well. I can't remember I think it's about 18,000 people a year that we're allowing to come in from people who are asylum seekers who've claimed asylum who are that's extra family members they're allowed to bring over after. I think it's about 50 people a day the Home Office is allowing to come through.
I'm also just hearing as well, apparently the dog has signed for Celebrity Big Brother for the next season.
Oh, fantastic.
So, this is how these things tend to work.
That would be quite something to watch.
Jumping out the aeroplane over Queensland. Just like the idea. There comes Pierre. He's
maybe the dog can have its own reality TV show.
Maybe it can.
Maybe there can be a documentary on the dog's struggle to get to Britain.
The journey of a dog.
Yeah.
That'd
be a good story.
Chloe, thank you, as ever. Chloe Dobbs with us on the programme. Over to you, some great... There's loads we didn't get to, but we will come to throughout the course of the programme as well. We're talking Israel, the government saying they've gone too far. Do you concur with the government? What are your thoughts on what is happening over there? David Lammy getting very, very animated. The Lucy Connelly story as well. This isn't going away. Her husband deeply upset, as you would imagine, in that appeal failing yesterday. We're going to chat to Dan Hodges on this. Got a slightly different view on what happened in the court yesterday. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news. You want to get in touch, 0344 499 1000. If you'd like to leave a voice note, you can do it there as well. Often the quickest way to bypass the queues. And, of course, you can message 87222. Just gone 1:30. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
We're getting a lot of messages about the migrant dog. Somehow was on one of those boats that came out. Just as a story, couldn't get more sort of insane. As the entire channel. So it doesn't matter where you sit on the issue, left wing, right wing, everyone can agree this is an absolute mess from whatever perspective you come at. And just as you think, you know, could anything surprise us anymore? A flipping Alsatian turns up on a boat. I think it was wearing one of those little life jacket things as well. I'm not kidding. Somebody here says, saying it's only a tweet is nonsense. A wave of an arm could start a mass riot. Saying it's only a wave is nonsense. There was huge potential here. The sentence was justified, but maybe suspended. That gives her a chance. Yeah, I don't think anybody would defend the original tweet, although Keir Starmer has defended the 31-month prison sentence given to Lucy Connelly for inciting racial hatred following the rejection of her appeal. He stressed that sentencing decisions are made by independent courts and praised their roles in upholding justice. This came after the independent MP Rupert Lowe posed the question to the Prime Minister in the Commons today. And I think we can have a listen to Rupert Lowe. Sorry, there was a slight delay on that. This is Rupert Lowe, now independent, of course, still very much a big voice. And we'll bring you that question in just a couple of moments. Meanwhile, Connelly's husband criticised the ruling as shocking and unfair, insisting she is not a right-wing thug. Let's speak with Dan Hodges, columnist over there at the Daily Mail. Afternoon to you, Dan.
Afternoon.
It's interesting. You do speak a lot of common sense. You often go against type. You say things that surprise people. I think yesterday was one of them. I spotted this when the appeal court ruling came through, that they were dismissing it, and I think you wrote something to the effect of the right decision. Would that be about right?
Absolutely, yes.
Well, was there any... I mean, lots of people... I think many people looked at this and said, well, you know, the tweet was bad, we all get that, but the sentence was pretty darn harsh.
Yeah, I mean, look, you and I use social media. We all send, you know, you and I send bad tweets. Lots of people send bad tweets. It wasn't a bad tweet, it was an illegal tweet. And there were two issues. Firstly, was she rightly convicted? She was rightly convicted, and we know that because she pleaded guilty. That was, you know, she admitted to the crime. And the appeal court were asked to look specifically at a couple of specific grounds for appeal, and the appeal court was unequivocal. It said that the threshold for a successful appeal had not been met and not even come close to being met. And they specifically, I think what was most significant is they specifically dealt with the issue that a lot of Lucy Connelly supporters have been highlighting, which is this idea that she was somehow duped by her brief into accepting into submitting a guilty plea. That she wasn't really aware of what she was doing, or she was in some way bounced into it. And the Court of Appeal looked at that very, very specifically. They said it was set out very, very clearly to her what the implications of her pleading guilty were. And she nevertheless went forward and submitted that appeal, and that's why the appeal submitted that plea, and that's why the appeal was rejected.
So presumably on that basis, she would have. I mean, usually you do get some concession for pleading guilty to something. So I would assume she would have got a longer prison sentence had she pleaded not guilty and found guilty. Or
yes, she did get concessions for that, and the judge in their initial sentencing remarks also explained how they had taken into account various other mitigating circumstances, including her previous good character, obviously the appalling loss of a child, and all those were taken into account in the sentencing.
But we are still left with a sort of irredeemable reality, Dan, that, you know, 31 months in jail is quite a long time for that kind of offence. And I'm going to say this till I'm blue in the face. I also think 5 years is a long time for a Just Stop Oil protester or someone who hasn't paid a TV licence. It just seems to be in that bracket of fairly extreme in terms of sentencing, particularly at a time when we're trying to empty our jails.
I don't think it's extreme when you are found guilty of stirring up racial hatred, which is obviously a serious crime and a serious offence and a serious blight on our society. I certainly don't think it's unjustified in the context of what happened and what was happening and what subsequently happened at that time.
But it was subsequent, wasn't it? I mean, this was written before there were any riots.
Yes, but obviously, as we know, that tweet was not sent that tweet wasn't sent in isolation. That tweet reflected a response from a significant number of people, and those responses, and again, the judge was clear about this in the initial sentencing remarks, those responses had a role in the major outbreak of violence that we saw. And she, in her tweet, advocated people burning down hotels, hostels containing asylum seekers and migrants, and that's exactly what some people tried to do.
What do you make of this? And you'll be familiar, Dan, with this line that actually what really happened here was this came right from above. Some people saying as far as number 10 that, you know, Keir Starmer, to put it in very basic Janet and John type terms, you know, makes a phone call to the head honcho over there at Court HQ and says, look, you know, you've got to jail these people for a long time.
Well, it's rubbish. I mean, the idea that Keir Starmer, firstly, that he initially picked up the phone to somebody to specifically say Lucy Connelly should be sent to jail for this offence. I mean, that's ridiculous. But what's even more ridiculous is that subsequently, sometime last week, he also then again picked up the phone to the Court of Appeal and got the Court of Appeal to say that the initial sentence was perfectly just. I mean, it's just, you know, if somebody had, this is the problem with these ludicrous conspiracy theories. If someone's got evidence that Keir Starmer or someone in Downing Street or someone in government did that, then present it, and we can debate it or discuss it. But no one has presented any evidence of that kind, and no one will, because you and I both know it's rubbish.
Did he help, or did he hinder justice, if you like, by, you know, fairly substantial comments about right-wing thugs? And OK, you could say he was only talking about right-wing. He wasn't talking about everybody who's got a problem with immigration. He was just talking about people throwing bricks at police officers' heads and trying to set fire to hotels and mosques and the like. You could reasonably get away with calling those people right-wing or thugs, etc., I suppose. But did that in any way amplify the debate to the point that the judiciary felt they had no choice but to go harsher on these sentences? And let's face it, I think we can all agree, Dan, lots of people went to jail who half an hour before would never have gone to jail for these kind of crimes.
Well, unfortunately, lots of people go to jail for crimes that they wouldn't have necessarily committed before. The reality is you have to separate what the Prime Minister's comments. I mean, firstly, the Prime Minister was right. The people who were attacking police officers, attempting to burn down hotels with women and children inside, were thugs, and a significant number of them were right-wing. So that was a perfectly legitimate description. But that's separate from her case, because, as I said, in her case, she pled guilty. She didn't dispute the charges. She pled guilty. The Court of Appeal was very clear. She completely understood the nature of the offences she was pleading guilty to, and the implications of pleading guilty to those offences, and that's why they upheld the appeal. They rejected the appeal. So upheld the sentence.
You don't sense that the atmosphere at the time kind of beget lots of more extreme sentencing than would have happened in previous times? Because we know, look, I know everyone can play the comparison game, but there's lots of fairly powerful comparisons. You know, how do you not go to jail for downloading child porn, but you do go to jail for a tweet like this? And there's some more extreme examples of that.
Look, unfortunately, we've had major public disorder in this country in the past. In those instances, it is normal to have the as it were, the legal process fast tracked, obviously because of the scale of the offences, and obviously the need to get on top of this disorder. And as part of that, the courts have traditionally given what some people may say were sort of exemplary sentences. But that's happened with every nature of public disorder we've had in this country going back for decades. And what's interesting is, on all those instances, or in almost all those instances, many of the people who have suddenly sprung to the barricades for Lucy Connelly have actually applauded that firm action and that swift action. And we can't pick and choose just because of the nature or the backdrop to the public disorder.
Well, just on the point of releasing people from jail, you know, we know that there's another wave of people who are going to be released to make space for in our prisons where there's clearly a huge problem. I mean, you might think there's been some violent offenders and domestic abusers and all sorts of people in those lists, past and going forward, perhaps. You might think somebody like Connelly and others would be the first on the list to be released and make way and have some other kind of, humiliating ankle tag type punishment for what they've done.
Well, I mean, a number of people are in jail for what I think most of us would regard are relatively minor offences. As I say, I don't think her comments, what she advocated, and stirring up racial hatred is necessarily of itself a minor offence. But in a sense, that's a kind of separate issue. We do have issues in relation to, obviously, overcrowding prison population. That's something that politicians need to address. It's not really something that I can feel qualified to say, well, person X should be released over person Y. I mean, what I have seen a lot in relation to this case, though, is a lot of people saying, well, why are people who have committed serious offences just be given a slap on the wrist? My view is the people who commit serious offences shouldn't be given a slap on the wrist either, and we should find a way of incarcerating them.
I wonder, just a final point though, Dan, that in this story, and I know, that the legal world or the criminal world is full of people that go, I didn't mean it, and we don't not send people to jail just because they subsequently say, I didn't mean it, or, no, you got it wrong. But I think with this case, and bearing in mind there was a lot of mischief going around on social media after the Southport killings, wrong names were put out there, all sorts of other inflammatory stuff, and responding to that, getting angry and thinking, this has got, we have got a huge problem. I'm going to put this tweet out there. 3 hours later thinking, that was a really stupid tweet to put out there. I'm going to take it down. I mean, that I think to many people, they would say the common sense would prevail. A person that had no track record legally or even online of saying stuff like this, it might have been a more obvious response to say quite clearly she doesn't really want to set fire to hotels. She was angry, she was stupid, she was misplaced, misinformed, and the minute she realised that, about 3 hours and 50 minutes later, she took it down. I mean, that's a fairly powerful, reasonable response.
The entire country was horrified by the events of Southport. The entire country didn't go out and send tweets anything like the nature that she sent. You're absolutely right. She subsequently deleted the tweet, but what also was evidence was also presented in court, and people tend to sort of brush this aside, that having deleted the tweet, she then joked with her friends about the nature of the tweet and did an LOL in relation to the tweet. And she then subsequently said to her friends that if she got into trouble in relation to the tweet, she was, quote, going to play the mental health card. So that is not, to me, someone who actually, at that point in time, and this was days, if not weeks after the event, was actually sincerely expressing genuine remorse for her actions.
Dan, thank you for your time. Dan Hodges, columnist over there at the Daily Mail, with his response. There's a lot in what Dan said there, and I hope I took on each part, but I'm sure you want to come in on some of that as well. There's such a plethora of views on this. I don't think there's not just one, there's not just for and against opinions. There are nuances to this one too. Let's have a listen then. Rupert Lowe, the independent MP, asking a question to the Prime Minister earlier today.
Does the Prime Minister agree that imprisoning Lucy Connelly, a young mother with a 12-year-old daughter, for one foolish social media post, soon deleted, is clearly not an efficient or fair use of prison?
Mr. Speaker, sentencing is a matter for our courts, and I celebrate the fact that we have independent courts in this country. I am strongly in favour of free speech. We've had free speech in this country for a very long time, and we protect it fiercely. But I'm equally against incitement to violence against other people. And I will always support the action taken by our police and courts to keep our streets and people safe.
Written probably last night, that response, I'd imagine, given today in the House of Commons in response to that question from Rupert Lowe. Over to you on that and the Israel question, 0344 499 1000.
disgusting. She's clearly a political prisoner. And I think it says something about British society when, you know, sex offenders, perverts and child groomers don't go to prison, but Lucy Connelly is still in prison. It's degradation of our society. And how low can we go? It's terrible. I think it's a stain on our history when things like this happen. Now, and let's face it, you know, I'm a mum myself, and I think any parent out there, the Southport murders of these innocent children affected everybody and every parent.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk. Just gone 10 to 2. This comes in from Jonathan, John in Woodford, who says the objective for Israel remains total victory. It's hard, but it's possible, and victory in wars takes more than fury. It takes hard choices, clear thinking, and time. Populism makes headlines. Resolve wins wars. If Hamas release all hostages next Wednesday, 28th of May, it will be 600 days. It all ends immediately, but Hamas will then have zero leverage and no cards left to play other than world sympathy. Did Al-Qaeda get sympathy for 9/11? Did we give Al-Qaeda sympathy for the Manchester Arena bombings? It's a very powerful and frankly spot-on point, John. Thank you for that. Mark's in Lincolnshire on the issue of Israel. What are you making of this, Mark? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Ian, mate. Yeah, the Israel thing, it's obviously, it's always going to be a complex situation over there. The way I see this is, ultimately, Israel do need to go in hard. They do need to take control of Gaza. I just find this really difficult because we have a government that is just so pro, I don't know, what do you call it now, terrorism? They just seem to be so hell-bent on it just to save their voter base, or one of their voter bases.
Yeah.
You know, the problem is, the problem that I have with this is just going to repeat itself. If we go along with the Labour ideology and all these left-wing governments in the West, and we go along with it like Ireland and all these other countries, oh, Israel is so terrible, Israel are awful, blah, blah, blah. This is just going to repeat. It will constantly repeat itself. The only way that you can get any kind of control back on this is for Israel to literally control Gaza, Israel to control the West Bank.
Yeah.
They need to control all of these areas where there is a threat coming in. Lebanon is slightly different because there is other things that you can do there because it's a different nation in itself. But the areas within their territory, yes, they do need to control.
But the trouble is, of course, because, you know, I think metaphorically speaking, you know, Gaza should be flattened, but not the people within it. Now, I think we all probably agree with that. You know, innocent people are getting killed. Kids are getting killed. There's aid issues as well. Nobody wants to see that, but simultaneously we would like to see Hamas absolutely crushed and eradicated. I don't think you can actually eradicate an ideology, as I'm sure you know, Mark, but that's the aim, isn't it? That's how precarious and difficult this is.
Well, the thing is, I mean, you're right in what you're saying, Ian. The problem is the ideology is always going to be there because Islam's always going to be there. That's the fundamental issue here at the end of the day, because it's the only religion that calls for this kind of stuff. Now, we can have an argument and a debate about, you know, the ins and outs of moderate Muslims and all the rest of it, but the central point is that ideology, what it calls for, you know, and it calls for this multiple times within their own holy book, you know, that's still going to be there. Whether a Muslim chooses to enact on that is a different matter. The issue that you're going to have with somewhere like Gaza is it's so instilled, it's so indoctrinated within them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I find it hard to believe at any point that if you were, for example, if the Israelis were to lay down their weapons, it would not just be Hamas slaughtering Jews.
100%. If Israel laid down their weapons and said, all right, we're really sorry, we're going to stop it here, then Hamas would move in and absolutely slaughter the place. I mean, we know that. And there's that kind of, if you like, gives the greatest example to the problem. Listen, I've got to move on, Mark, for no other reason than we're about to hit the clock and I want to get another voice in before the news. Let's go back to that story. Lucy Connelly. George is in Dundee. How you doing, George?
I'm doing great, Ian. Thank you.
Good. Nice to have you with us. What are you thinking?
Your last contributor said this country has always handed down sentences for public disorder and made examples of people. I didn't see any examples being made of BLM. I didn't see any examples being made of the Palestine protests. I didn't see until very, very recently any examples being made of the Just Stop Oil protests. There is two-tier justice in this system. The pervert Hugh Edwards and Gary Lineker recently. Hugh Edwards should have been sentenced far more severely.
Yep.
Gary Lineker should be facing his day in court. But people can see this now, Ian. This country is waking up and we can see it. It's right there. It can't be ignored anymore.
There it is, George. Very succinct stuff, powerful stuff. Thank you, George in Dundee. And you know what he's absolutely bang on about is sometimes a perception becomes a reality. If you went through every single sentencing in the whole country, look, we've done this for years. You know, why does a fella in Rhyl get a heftier sentence to a bloke in Aberdeen, despite committing the same offence? Why do some people get sent to jail for nicking a car but not for downloading child porn? I mean, that's not a new subject, all right? We've always had that. But when you see it writ large on social media, and I'm thinking in particular the Palestinian protests, where, I mean, Black Lives Matter was largely, I mean, there was a bit of a tipping point on one of them, but was over here, not in the States, was largely peaceful protest. But the Palestinian marches the anti-Israel marches, let's call them what they are, was so riddled in hatred and bile, fury, and just the most outrageous chanting, slogans, imagery, that you'd think that, you know, we could at least name at least half a dozen people who were serving time in the chiller, specifically on that. When you see that and you set it against something fairly similar in terms of protest or angst or animated opinion, you are naturally forced, and I know there's probably legal explanations for this, but you are absolutely forced into wondering what the hell is going on in my country. It's not an unreasonable position to advocate. It really is not an unreasonable position to advocate, and politicians need to get a grip and understand that. Very few parties do. 0344 499 1000. We'll look at PMQs. Kevin Schofield joins us as he does on a Wednesday, coming up in a couple of moments' time after the news at 2.
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good afternoon. Welcome back to the home of Common Sense. Coming up on 3 minutes after 1 o'clock. So those strong words in Parliament yesterday. Keir Starmer condemning Israel's renewed Gaza offensive as completely wrong, as Britain halts trade and summons the ambassador. Meanwhile, Foreign Secretary David Lammy went even further. He called it intolerable, abominable and morally unjustifiable. They were his words yesterday. Thoughts on that? Do you agree with the government that Israel have gone too far? Also, meanwhile, Prime Minister has signalled a U-turn on plans to scrap winter fuel payments for 10 million pensioners, saying he's now looking at it, ditching the cuts following that furious public backlash. Truth be told, he had literally no choice. This was going to hang around his neck right up to the next election. We'll look more at that in a couple of moments. And taxpayers are to fork out thousands of pounds to put up a dog that crossed the channel in a packed dinghy with its illegal immigrant owner, who is now believed to be staying in an asylum seeker hotel, also at the public expense. The dog, I'm not sure, is whether it's at the Four Seasons or the Holiday Inn, but either way, it's coming over here, nicking our dog food, bones, free everything for the dog. I bet it's got a nice, it was one of those gold leads as well, hasn't it, that light up in the dark. More on that and everything you need to know. All the breaking news right here on Talk. 0344 499 1000 is where you will find us. Rich says, don't forget to ask Dan Hodges about, in fact, Dan's gone now, about the Labour count. Obviously, I can't, thank you to Rich in Yorkshire, you're right, but we can't talk about that case because it's still sort of live, but you do scratch your head sometimes. What's happened to the two blokes that were charged with thumping a copper in the nose at Manchester Airport? Where's that case gone? It did go to, they were charged and it went to court. Again, we can't say very much, but I can legitimately ask the question of what is the status of that case? It just kind of disappeared. It's not gone away. I know it's not gone away. But, you know, it's a straightforward case of assault on police and whatever else was there. And you might think they'd have that thing wrapped up by noon, but apparently not. We'll look into it. Kevin Schofield is back with us. Kev, of course, is the political editor at HuffPost UK, diligently tracking German Shepherd dogs in migrant hotels, Kevin. I mean, this is the big story of the day at the moment. Where the story can't get any straight.
A strong lid.
Yeah, we could. We'll just pause at that moment, see what I did there, and we could carry on like that. But when you think a story can't get any, this is the great thing about journalism and news, isn't it? You know, every now and again there's a little curveball, like that thing coming in, somebody with their binoculars going, "There's a flipping dog on that boat." Really?
We've obviously read that we are a nation of dog lovers. So
could be that.
We were never ever going to turn the dog away. We were never going to put the dog down. That's just not what we do in this country.
Well, my theory is, I said before the news, I don't know if you heard this, Kevin, but was that this is nothing to do with the migrant thing. This was a dog that just hated Calais and thought, this is a grim, I don't know if you've ever been to Calais.
A smart dog.
It's a grim, there's literally no redeeming qualities about, you know, I interviewed the mayor of Calais once, in fact, a couple of times, and I thought, what do you do? What is that job? The mayor of what? The mayor of a town that looks like it stopped working in 1968.
Yeah.
And anyway, I think the dog just thought, I'm done with this place.
Yeah.
There's boats over there. I'll get on one of those things.
Give the UK a go. Yeah.
Give the UK a go.
I mean, honestly, all joking aside, it is the type of thing you can absolutely see the next development in the story is it will be rehomed and someone will give it a loving home and it will live a long and happy life.
And it'll be a famous dog. Got a famous dog. You could put it on Britain's Got Talent and stuff, you know. Simon Cowell apparently loves a performing hound, so, you know.
There you go, you see. There's so many opportunities.
So many opportunities for the great wonder, the sailor dog, the migrant dog. The
littlest hobo. Remember
the
that
littlest hobo.
Remember
that
one?
That's right, yeah. What happened to that? They should bring that back. Maybe not. Let's move to Prime Minister's Question Time. It was an hour ago. You were there, Kevin, as you do diligently every week in your world, in the press gallery, watching what happened. To give us an overview, firstly, a lot of people saying Kemi Badenoch had quite a good week.
She did. I mean, we've got a proper story, and that doesn't happen very often, a proper government U-turn. Quite often they try, I think, to throw these things into PMQs, because not that it will get lost in the mix, but it's...
no one's prepped any questions on it.
And that's right, and it kind of takes your attention away from all the other questions he gets asked, because you've got one big story, and it is, significant. They're U-turning on this winter fuel policy. They've been under pressure for some time from Labour MPs and from voters, obviously, on it. We knew that it was in the works. We knew that there was discussions going on behind the scenes. They denied it repeatedly, that there was going to be any change, until there is a change. Now, the weird thing was, Kemi Badenoch asked about it, and then in his answer, he talked about, we're going to look at the thresholds, the earnings thresholds. And then her next question made no reference to the fact that he had quite obviously U-turned.
Yes.
So you would have thought that would be the perfect moment for her to say, how humiliating for the Prime Minister. He's had to drag him into Parliament, and he's had to, go back on what he said, so much for the Iron Chancellor, all this type of stuff. But it was almost like she didn't hear the answer. So whether...
That is bizarre.
It was bizarre, because he set it up on a plate for her. In fact, I got a text from someone in number 10 straight after it, and it was like, I can't believe that she's missed that. She's missed the line.
Completely.
Which was, I'm giving you your U-turn that you've been demanding for weeks.
But is that because Kemi Badenoch doesn't really do spontaneity in that respect? She will be supremely uncomfortable to suddenly go there.
Well, she's gone in there obviously with her 6 questions. Yeah. And the assumption would have been that, as in previous weeks, he would bat it away and refuse to give her an answer. But he's sort of wrong-footed her by saying, actually, you know what, we are going to look at it, because, we are been listening. Well, their argument for it now is that the economy's growing. So early in the week...
So now they've got some money. This is absolute nonsense.
Complete nonsense. But they've just sort of... It's like a passing life raft, and they've jumped on it as to give themselves...
Totally.
So he said that, and, rather than think on her feet and react to what he said, she's just basically gone, right, question number 2, and gone on to the next question, which just jarred, really, because the opportunity was there for it to really make some hay.
I mean, I think... Again, it comes down to, the reason Farage, we'll come back to him in a second, is such a good operator. Because what you want from that is not just for her to come back to it. You want to see that increase. You want to hear her say, hang on a second, did the Prime Minister just say, would you confirm you are doing a massive U-turn?
Yeah, absolutely.
And you want it said in a way that people go, wow, she's absolutely with us.
She's on it. She's on it.
She's on it.
And it's thanks to her that he's done
this.
But
I don't think even if she did come back, I don't think in the performative sense, she's great at doing that. No. And that's the bit that, you're probably surrounded by people who aren't great at advising on that either.
That is the issue. And, it's not like the Prime Minister's any good at it either. I mean, he's got actually noticeably worse in the last few weeks for just reading out answers.
Although he did come up with a reasonable line about Nigel Farage.
That was a good one. He was reading it, but it was a good line.
Nigel Farage wasn't in PMQs, and obviously he wasn't there yesterday to talk about what was going on. He's in America, apparently, and it forced Mr Starmer to joke. He's absent so often, basically, I almost expected to see him on the immigration statistics. Which is not a bad line.
Not a bad line, and he also said he's the first to... he's maybe the first to use the new e-gates, which obviously is the big win that they announced from the EU deal. And that in fact, what was interesting was Lee Anderson, who'd asked the question, he was laughing his head off. Richard Tice was also laughing his head off at this joke, which I'm just wondering if Nigel Farage was watching that, what he would have thought about his 2 colleagues laughing at his expense. But it was a funny joke.
It's a reasonable line, wasn't it?
And obviously not one that Keir Starmer has come up with himself, clearly. But he did manage to, he said the line and it was fine. And he got a decent laugh out of it, and you can't often
But it should really be the Leader of the Opposition that is scoring those kind of points. Those sort of lines should be from the Leader of the Opposition to the Prime Minister or somebody in his front bench's team.
Yeah, definitely. And we've said it before, others who were in her position were much, much better at it. And it doesn't necessarily follow that you're good at PMQs, therefore you're going to become Prime Minister. William Hague is a classic example. He beat Tony Blair week in, week out, and then got thrashed in the 2001 general election.
Yeah, that's the best example, really.
But it's good for morale amongst your troops. If you're knocking the Prime Minister around, it makes your MPs feel good.
Of course it does.
But the opposite's the case if you're not.
Let's talk about what happened yesterday as well in the House of Commons, this statement on Israel. I mean, I don't think I've ever seen David Lammy this animated, which forced me to think, well, this is his true skin. He's happier in this condemnation of Israel.
Yeah.
Previously, they'd all kept to this, particularly in opposition, where you had Starmer, who was sort of more forthright than Rishi Sunak on matters Israel.
Yeah.
But here it is. I mean, there's obviously a lot going on there. There is a humanitarian crisis. There's, it's a horrendous mess for lots of reasons. But Lammy kind of came straight out with it there, didn't he? I mean, Keir Starmer began by talking about how, he was, quite clear that this was an intolerable situation. Humanitarian aid needs to get in at pace, he said. But Lammy then really went for it. He said, we must call this what it is. It's extremism, it's dangerous, it's repellent, it is monstrous. And he got the cheers of his benches on that one and cries of shame when they talked about what was going on in Israel.
Yeah, he did. And it really juxtaposed with Priti Patel, the Shadow Foreign Secretary, because obviously she would not go anywhere near as far in condemning Israel. And it is hugely significant because thus far the government has been broadly supportive of Israel, clearly in the immediate aftermath of October the 7th.
Yeah.
Absolutely was. But as the war has progressed and Israel's response to what happened has become, just stronger and stronger and stronger, I think it's reached a breaking point almost. Yeah. I mean, it'll be interesting to see if, what Donald Trump says next. I mean, were he to...
That's going to be key,
not as far as David Lammy, but if he were to indicate in some way that Netanyahu, you're going to have to rein it in a bit here because this is just getting outrageous, then I think that would be hugely significant. But of course, remember, you had the leaders of Keir Starmer, France and Canada with that statement a couple of nights ago as well, which was also pretty...
And of course, Netanyahu isn't, the most popular leader in his own country.
Exactly.
I mean, he's under pressure in that respect. Yeah. He could be gone at some point as well.
And he's got that fragile coalition government with a lot of, further to the right people than him. He's got to try and keep them on board as well.
Let's move to this story. Sticking with Starmer, Keir Starmer refused to rule out tax rises after Angela Rayner apparently proposed 8 increases. This was a leaked memo to Rachel Reeves. Starmer spokesman dismissed concerns about a rift between Rayner and Reeves, emphasising Labour's focus on economic growth and stability. That's sort of how it works, isn't it? Rayner's proposals including reinstating pensions, lifetime allowance, dividend tax changes and higher corporation tax for banks. How does what you might think between a Deputy Prime Minister and a Chancellor, how does that memo, I don't know in what form it came, whether it was sent as a letter, put in a box, taken over to the Treasury from the Deputy Prime Minister, whether it was a text message, how did it, how does it fall into the hands of a journalist, Kevin? What's the process here, do you think?
Well, there are 2 theories here. One is that it was briefed by Angela Rayner's office themselves. Great scoop by the Telegraph, I have to say. The thought being that that would burnish her credentials on the left of the party, and if you see quite a lot of left-wing MPs came out and said this is great, we should absolutely be doing this instead of cutting disability benefits, for instance. Just tax the rich and all will be well. Because, they've made the point that if you watch her in PMQs every week, she pretty much has to sit there like she's chewing on a wasp and doesn't look happy at all.
Not at all.
And I think she's had to swallow an awful lot. She's obviously on the left of the party, so she's having to... I think it's... So the theory is she's leaked it in order to send a message to the backbenches, I'm still on your side, guys. This is what I'm trying to do behind the scenes. The other theory is, which I think is less convincing, is that the Treasury maybe briefed it in order to basically do in Angela Rayner. But, given that it happened 2 or 3 months ago, it was before the spring statement and was ignored anyway, I don't really see what would necessarily be in it for them. So I tend to think, and I don't know this, but I tend to think it's more likely to have been leaked by Angela Rayner's side just to sort of, as I say, boost her standing on the Labour backbenches.
Apparently there's going to be an election, a general election, in the next couple of weeks.
Who says that?
A bloke on Twitter.
Oh, well.
Yeah, and I only raised that point because... If I had a quid for every time someone's predicted a general election, there's definitely going to be one before the end of the year. Starmer will be gone. There's nothing that suggests that's going to happen.
impossible.
But it does come up, and I saw somebody I saw a tweet from somebody who said, breaking news, there's going to be a snap. And I just saw this, I thought, what's a snap? Have you ever heard anyone in political commentary refer to a snap election as a snap, singular?
Never.
Never.
No, never,
no one ever says
never,
that.
ever.
So somebody said there's going to be a snap, and I thought, well, what? I was going mad looking at what's a snap? A cold snap? Is it going to be? Is it going to get chilly over the bank holiday?
Well,
that was
snap, I've heard, in journalism, you heard of a PA snap.
Yeah, exactly.
When you put,
That's a
the
snap.
press association puts something out that's like a massive story. Whack, get it out. That's
It's a snap. Yeah.
Yeah.
But a snap. Anyway, so that was one prediction I saw, and then another one. Angela Rayner's going to take over, and then somebody said, well, she wouldn't be able to take over because obviously there's a different system in the Labour Party for getting your leader. But then, of course, Brown took over Blair, didn't over from Blair.
He did, but there wasn't there was a contest. Well, there wasn't even a contest. There was a process. There was a leadership process. No one stood against him.
No one stood against him.
But, you know, if people could, well, no one got enough support. I think John McDonnell tried and didn't get enough support.
That's right.
And he was elected. But weirdly, they still had to have a campaign of sorts. But no, they would need
I'd
to
almost
be an
forgotten
election.
the sort of Brown campaign.
Yeah, it was weird because, yeah, like I say, no one stood against him. Well, no one got enough support in order to get on the ballot paper, so no one actually cast a vote in his favour, which was part of his problem. Really.
And the public never voted for him because he...
That's right.
You know, he lost that 2010 election, and back to that meal in the Islington restaurant, he was expecting to do at least a full term, wasn't he?
Yeah, well, the plan was, I think, wasn't that Blair was going to do one full term, then stand down halfway through the second term to make way for Gordon Brown, and then, of course, he didn't do that. He reneged. And hung on until did his full second term. Then, eventually was forced out in his third term by supporters of Gordon Brown. I can't imagine the level of anger at the Treasury when Gordon Brown realised Blair was not going to step down. Yeah, furious.
Stuff would have been thrown, I'm pretty sure of that.
The mobile phones would have been bouncing off people's heads.
Off Spads' heads and all sorts of things. Who knows? He wasn't a violent man, but he was a man who could be angry. We know that much. The only reason I've raised all of this is because, the possibility that Angela Rayner could be the Prime Minister. That was where I was going to with this.
I mean, in theory, she's a deputy at the moment, but she would need to... I think she'd need to resign as deputy and to stand for leader, because the deputy post is elected by the Labour Party members.
Yes, because he can't fire her for his deputy.
He can't sack her as deputy, because she was elected by the members. So presumably she would need to stand down in order to stand
and
to
then
be
stand
leader.
As,
And I dare say she probably fancies the idea, but her seat looks pretty precarious.
That's very true.
The next general election, that she might be better advised focusing on that in the first instance.
I mean, 2029 cannot come fast enough, could it?
Well, for a lot of them, it certainly can, because it's, they could lose their seats without a doubt. A lot of Labour MPs, certainly a lot of them that came in at the last election will definitely lose their seats. They've got such wafer-thin majorities; they're not coming back. It'll be very interesting indeed. But a lot can change in 4 years.
True. Kevin, it's been great as ever. Thank you. Kevin Schofield with us, of course, political editor at HuffPost UK. Thank you to him. All the breaking news, if we get any more on the migrant dog, who we've named Pierre for no particular reason, we'll bring you that as well. We don't even know where he is. Is it a he? Is it a she? Details to come. And, of course, that question, has Israel gone too far, which is what Lammy and Starmer are saying. And more on Lucy Connelly as well. Where does that story go next? She will be released probably in August, all bar, some misbehaviour in jail, which I don't think anybody seriously predicts. Comments on that as well, 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
think this is a landmark deal, which is going to help people in Britain through better jobs in Britain, through bringing down prices of the checkout, getting more money in people's pockets, and also through boosting the economy, boosting economic growth, which is so important to what we're trying to do as a government. So, yeah, I think this is really good news for Britain in terms of jobs, in terms of prices, and in terms of economic growth.
How is it going to create jobs?
Well, we know that this helps to boost trade with Europe. So there's an SPS agreement.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Thank you to Steve in Birmingham, who says the Manchester Airport Brothers trial is due to start 30th June, Liverpool Crown Court, expected to last 3 weeks. There it is. Thank you for that, Steve. I know I work in a global newsroom here, and I suppose I could have just asked somebody on the legal desk at the Times, whatever. I'm more grateful to Steve in Birmingham, who was right on it. Thank you, Steve. Angie says, why did the sun black out the dog's eyes? That's funny. Yeah, if you have a look at that Sun front page, well, it's the page that tells the story of the dog that turned up in Dover with a boatload of migrants. For some bizarre reason, instead of the usual 50 fighting fit 23-year-old men, there was a dog on board, barking mad. And the Sun have done what only the Sun can do brilliantly, and that's have a little bit of humour with it by protecting the dog's identity. So they blacked out the German Shepherd's eye. So we know nothing about the dog. We've got no idea whether it's a Calais-based dog, whether it was a dog that was dragged on a journey from Eritrea, whether it was a dog that just happened to, hop in accidentally. Was it bought on purpose? We know nothing, but all of that is being investigated. I wonder if it was chipped as well, so they can find out a little more about it. Gary says, if during World War II somebody had told us to ease up on the bombing of Dresden because too many women and children are getting killed, what do you think our reaction would have been? Just like us back then, the Israelis are fighting for their very survival in a war they didn't start, but they are determined to finish. It's also worth remembering that a huge number of people in Gaza took to the streets to celebrate the butchering of 1,400 Israelis in the October 7th attacks by Hamas. So nobody has clean hands on this one. The truth is, there is always collateral damage in a war in the form of innocent victims. It's unavoidable, and of course, Hamas fighters could end it all tomorrow by releasing the hostages and returning to whatever sewer they crawled out of. But we know that's not going to happen. It's a very straightforward point. It's brutal, but it happens to be the reality. And you could take a completely passive approach to it and say there should be no war, and that's fine. If you are of that position, great. But if you understand that at times, in difficult times, that there is a necessity for a physical war, which the idea being will end in a resolution that makes everything so much better than it was before, then you have to accept, as Gary says. And it is grim, of course, it's horrific. In fact, it's sort of mad, really, and I hope in 100 years' time or less, we sit there going, blimey, we used to go out and kill people because their leaders disagree with each other. That would be great. We'd all love to be in that place. We're not there now. And when you've got sort of several medieval death cults lurking around the planet who have a really bizarre way of doing business, who think that it's 1567 and we should all kind of be adhering to a curious, odd, ecclesiastical, God-driven diktat of how we do life that curtails rights, it eradicates progress, it recognises very little about the modern world, it will discriminate across all manner of categories and groups of people. When you get into that, you think, wow, that's who you're battling here. These bozos actually believe this old guff. Somebody told them. Oh, God told them. 0344 499 1000. Let's go back to freedom of speech. Philippa is in Poole. Philippa, what have you got for us? Afternoon to you.
Afternoon, Ian. Lovely to speak to you.
And you too.
I basically think our freedom of speech and our rights has gone completely out of the window.
Go on.
You can tell that basically from Lucy Connelly's case and her tweet.
Was that her right of freedom of speech to write that?
Yeah, she should have been allowed to write what she wanted. Yes, the tweet wasn't appropriate,
but it should be legally okay to suggest that people burn down hotels with people in them.
No, but we've got the right to air our opinions. It's like we're living back in 1984 with the thought police.
But if I were to stand, and I'm only having this discussion like this with you, Philippa, just for the kind of devil's advocate. But if I stood in the middle of a high street with a megaphone saying "kill all brown people," particularly ones in hotels, would that be my right to do that?
It's your right to do that, but you wouldn't do it.
No, I wouldn't. But should I? If I did, should I face consequence? Should the police come and arrest me for that?
Yes, but I don't think a woman, who's got a 12-year-old child with special needs should be in prison for a tweet.
No, I agree that I certainly agree with the ridiculousness of the prison sentence. What the bit that interests me is how. I mean, anyone who committed a crime will always say, I can't go to jail, Judge, because, I've got kids at home, I'm a single parent, I didn't mean to beat the living daylights out of that pensioner, but, you've got to have some understanding. I need to be at home with my kids. We'd all go, hang on, you can't use that as a defence once you've committed the crime.
Basically, you cannot say anything. My mum and my grandmother taught me that if you haven't got anything nice to say about anything or anyone, then don't say it. Literally, I'll give you an example. I went and helped canvass for Reform UK up in Runcorn a couple of weeks ago. Literally, all I put on social media was a photograph of myself dressed lovely with my Reform rosette.
Yeah.
And I put doing my political bit today in Runcorn.
Good for
That's
you.
all I put. I got a barrage of DMs, private messages, asking me if it was a joke that I supported reform, and asking me about my political opinion and what was I doing. And I said, my opinion is absolutely nothing to do with you.
True.
You cannot tell me what to think. The thing is, people cannot be told what to think, whether they put it online or not put it online.
But your nan wouldn't have liked the Lucy Connelly tweet, right? Because based on what you said, if you've got nothing nice to say, don't say it. So even if we understand that she was very, very angry at the time, which I think we all probably were.
Well, I just think it's all got very much out of hand, and people need to be able to express their opinions so that the political elite know how the electorate are actually feeling.
Yeah, well,
and if they don't know how we're feeling, then it means that they're completely out of touch, and they are out of touch because of the policies that they put in place. You can see that from PMQs, you can see that with the winter fuel allowance, all that kind of stuff. And you guys haven't even started talking about the disability benefit reforms as well, which I really think you need to address.
Yeah, no, we are planning a whole show on that.
I absolutely love talkTV, and the reason why I love talkTV is because you give a voice to the voiceless, people who can't often express how they feel. And I really thank you guys for that, because it means so much.
Philippa, thank you. It's a great call. I was just going to, and thank you to Philippa and Paul. I was just going to say, there does seem to be, when it comes to the kind of politics of the thing, as distinct to the couple that whose house was, bear with me on this, the couple whose house was raided because they said something on a WhatsApp group about the school. They were becoming a thorn in the side of the school, and blah blah blah. And the police en masse went to their house, and they knocked on the door. I think they handcuffed them both, possibly, and took them away. And then it was all kind of dropped and all the rest of it. Aside from that, which is not really a political issue, have we seen any examples when we've seen these cases of the police knocking on doors, or we've seen people ended up in jail of anyone that you would say is left-wing. Because there really does seem to be you could say, well, right-wingers are a little more vocal. They might be more vocal, they might be a little brutal sometimes. I don't know, I'm thinking aloud here. Maybe it's that. But I can't really recall any cases. I think I'm right in saying that during the riots, were there two guys who... Was there a couple of guys that were... And I'm going to use the term Asian guys, as I remember. I know that's a very generic term. South Asian guys might kind of focus it down a little bit. That also went to jail, and possibly for rioting, and maybe sort of on the other side, or maybe it was the same side. I don't know. I'm sure I read that. But generally speaking, it does seem to be right-wing people that end up with a knock on the door or a stiff sentence from the beak. I'm happy to be put right on that, and I'm sure somebody's going to start. Please text and message if you've got a counter to that and say, actually, did you not know that Mickey Smithers, the old socialist, went to jail for X, Y and Z? We will see. Lines are open, 0344 499 1000. More comment from you, Lucy Connelly on the list, Israel on the list as well. The migrant Alsatian is also on the list. If anyone is connected or knows the identity of the Alsatian, we're happy to take some anonymous, of course, anonymous calls, tip-offs at this end. We're fine with all of that as well. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk. Lots to get through. Dave in Gloucester says, I never listen to Prime Minister's Question Time now, as there may be questions, but there are never answers, just swerves, vacuous, empty statements with no detail or substance, fence-sitting or blaming previous governments or ministers for abuse, and to that sneering, pathetic, infantile attempts at humour. And the whole thing is a shambles and about as much use as an ashtray on a motorbike. It is, but I do sort of sense it was... Has it always been like that? Well, I was in the press gallery for a number of years, and this was when David Cameron was Prime Minister. And the same... And then latterly Gordon Brown. The same kind of thing sort of happened there. And I wonder whether it's more of a showcase for backbenchers than it is for anything else. Once in a while you'll get a bit of a row between the Leader of the Opposition and the... But then they've got 6 questions, and once they've used them up, they never come back to it anyway. Nothing really gets settled by that. Has it ever been different? Now, taxpayers are footing the bill to house a German Shepherd that crossed the Channel in a dinghy, apparently with its owner. We've been talking about this all afternoon. The dog's now in quarantine for at least 4 months, while its owner is staying at an asylum seeker hotel. Officials are even considering turning the dog into a Border Force sniffer, thanks to its trainable breed. Let's speak to David Goodhart, author and journalist. I mean, just as the Migrant Channel story couldn't take any more twists, David, along comes a big old German Shepherd. Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Ian.
It's an extraordinary twist, isn't it? I don't know whether they've fully established that it came with one of the people on the boat, or whether it just didn't like Calais very much and jumped on a boat.
Yeah, I mean, every day, pretty much every day, you read in the newspapers extraordinary reasons for people being allowed to stay in the UK, and now we have the canine equivalent. Although it did occur to me, I mean, would there be more public outrage if the dog had been put down rather than it being allowed to stay at considerable taxpayer expense?
It's a very good point. I'd hate to put that to the ballot, that one, because it would be... I'm not sure we'd like the answer, but nobody wants to... I mean, the dog would be seen as an innocent party, perhaps, in all of this.
No, indeed, yeah. But no, I mean, there is obviously a serious point behind this, which is the laws that make it... The laws that were laid down mainly, 70 or 80 years ago in very, very different circumstances, laws that were drawn up, very generous laws that were drawn up to make it relatively easy for refugees and asylum seekers to enter European countries, partly out of guilt over the way that Jews were not allowed to escape from various countries before and during the Second World War. And, we have these two famous articles, Article 8, the family article, and Article 3, the inhuman treatment article, or maybe the other way around, which are constantly being used to enable people to avoid deportation, which might not happen anyway, even if people were given legal permission to stay. And obviously, we are a liberal democracy. We have the separation of powers. We have an independent judiciary. But we have to, ultimately, politicians, democratically elected politicians, should be making these decisions about the balance of judgment as to whether someone should stay or not. Not in each individual case, but there is such a thing as giving guidance to the judiciary, giving guidance to lawyers. I mean, I don't know why. I mean, you'd have thought that every time people read a story like this, it's another 100,000 voters for reform, surely. And yet the politicians do not seem able to respond to it.
Yeah.
And that's the. I mean, I think one thing that is quite likely to happen, which will save their skins, is that I think people in continental Europe, I mean, the countries that matter most, Germany particularly, and France, will themselves decide that these European Convention laws are not fit for purpose any longer and will reform them. Not completely abolish them, but will make it much more possible to deport people or stop them coming in the first place, or some version of Rwanda to disincentivize people from coming in the first place. I mean, I think it's very unlikely that Starmer or the Labour government, Starmer, after all, is a human rights lawyer. Much of his career has been based around the drawing up of and promoting of the Human Rights Act. So it's very difficult to imagine him taking a very tough line on this. But I think he will be saved by Europe in the next year or two.
Yeah, I sense you're right about that. I just remembered as well, David, do you recall back in, it was either 2010 or 2011, when Theresa May told a Tory party conference that an illegal immigrant avoided deportation because of his pet cat. And I'd originally forgot about this, and I remember Ken Clarke, who was quite miffed about it because he didn't quite believe it, and they thought, oh, she's made this story up to make a sort of powerful comment to the party faithful. But we do now read stories of people, retaining their status because of chicken nuggets in Albania, or a lack of chicken nuggets. There was so many curious stories. I wonder whether this one will end up, just on a sort of slightly lighter point here, with somebody claiming I can't be deported because of my Alsatian or German Shepherd dog, Pierre.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it does make great headlines for newspapers. I mean, that, it does add to the gaiety of nations in some respect. But, yeah, I mean, it's, I wonder whether this actually might, but the people who organise these, the people smugglers will be noting this, I mean, it may be a kind of new way of ensuring that you're not returned if you have a pet with you.
Yes. You see people kind of coming across the boat holding a cage with a budgie in it and an iguana under one arm and, I don't know, a gerbil under the other. Who knows where this crazy story might go. We're going to watch with interest. David, always good to talk. Thank you for coming on with us, David Goodhart, author and journalist on the sort of insanity of where we are at. Benji says, dog wanted fish and chips. Sniffer dog stood at the front of the boat and pointed west. It could be that. It could be that. Who knows? One here from No Name Given says, Ian, saying it's only a tweet is nonsense. A wave of an arm could... I did read this earlier. I know this sometimes happens and I forgot to note that I'd read it earlier, but I will read this again. This is reference Lucy Connelly. To say it's only a tweet is nonsense. A wave of an arm could start a mass riot. Saying it's only a wave is nonsense. There was huge potential here. The sentence was justified, but maybe should have been suspended. That would have given her a chance. You could have accepted that if it was suspended. Yeah, I kind of get that. Gavin makes the point that it's no use arguing that the tweet was taken down. It was viewed nearly 400,000 times. So people will have remembered that and formed a body of other tweets that were saying very similar things. And there's something in that as well, I'm sure. Over to you, 0344 499 1000. Gerald says it's the sentencing guidelines that are the problems. Judges are slavishly following the guidelines instead of stepping back and doing the right thing in all of the circumstances. This is not the first time the sentencing guidelines have caused problems. That's very true. And I mentioned this, I was talking, oddly, to a fairly senior barrister last night about this. And I was also found myself having this discussion as well to around these sort of these whole areas of what's going on with Lucy Connelly. Found myself having that discussion also last night as well in different forms with Chris. Now, what's interesting is that it is true, and the barrister, when I mentioned about the 2011 riots, which is the sort of go-to example where they also gave out fairly stiff sentences, he raised the issue of the miners' strike. He raised the issue of Toxteth, as in riots, of Brixton, as in riots, of Tottenham, as in riots. And in all of those occasions, there were people who were sent to jail for very long periods. This wasn't social media stuff. But there was a very authoritarian approach specifically to that, because the last thing a government wants, almost their worst nightmare, is public disorder, stroke riots. It doesn't get any worse as a scenario for a government in so many senses. So one of the reasons why in all of those settings you saw people that were, some would say they were brutalised. I mean, the miners' strike, if you watch the latest Netflix documentary on that, which I would absolutely strongly advise you to watch, is full of, examples of, wow, the state went there, they did that. These are working class people. I mean, I appreciate they were standing in the way of a wider government plan, but what happened to some of those people was utterly extraordinary. Absolutely extraordinary. But again, these things happen sort of organically, and they happen, incrementally by instalments almost. So you don't always see the big picture as it's only when you look back in history and go, look back 30, 40 years and see what was happening. And again, Toxteth, Brixton, these kind of areas. You talk about two-tier policing. Talk to a young black kid in North London about two-tier policing. They would have given you this argument for decades, all right? So, these things are not entirely new in so many respects. I also understand all of the anger that comes around this, and the anger is massive because there is a sense, and I asked earlier, are there examples of people who on the left have been either jailed or certainly had a knock at the door because of a left-wing tweet? Maybe there's no such thing as a bad left-wing tweet in terms of excitement. I don't know. Amy is down in London. What do you make of it all, Amy? Good afternoon. Amy, can you hear us?
Good afternoon, Ian. Great show.
Thank you very much. What are your thoughts?
I can hear you.
Yep. What do you got for us?
Hi.
Hi.
Regarding Lucy Connelly's tweet.
Yes.
I don't agree with it. I think it was thing, but if this government and the previous government hadn't put the country in the situation we're in with illegal migration, then she wouldn't have tweeted in the first place. And I'm also looking forward to what Gary Lineker's punishment will be for a racial tweet, racial hatred tweet.
There was and many people are making that, not unreasonably, that point. I think I'm right in saying there was a point during the Black Lives Matter protest in America, not in this country, after what happened there. There was lots of disquiet. There was vandalism, there was violence, people were killed, places were set fire to. And I've got a feeling Keir Starmer said, Amy, something on the lines of, sometimes you have to you have to find out why people are angry. And had a sort of I can't find evidence of those exact words, but I seem to remember something like that this is worth pursuing to see why people are angry. Now, he doesn't seem to have applied that to what happened in this country. I'm putting that out there, and I stand to be corrected if he didn't say that. But so I seem to remember something on the lines of that, and you're right to point it out. Amy, I've got to move, but thank you very much for your call and comment. 0344 499 1000. That is where you'll find us. This is Talk.
BBC decide this is going to be our star. We're going to aim this person at this audience. With Russell Brand, he was a comedian. It was at young people. With Stacey Solomon, it's at young mums. With Gary Lineker, it was with football dads and centrist dads and so on. They build these people up. And what happens is that the authority and the power transfers from the BBC to that individual. And the BBC create monsters, and they have no control over these people.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk. 0344 499 1000. 10 to 3. Should we do the Voice of Doom? Day 13, was it? Day 13 of the Voice of Doom. The mystery voice with a political persuasion. Remember, we've given you some clues over the last couple of days. You are looking for a former Labour cabinet minister. This is the voice.
This is so interesting.
But who is it? A former Labour cabinet minister. Have another listen.
This is so interesting.
Don't phone in. There ain't any prizes, but you can message in if you want to have a crack at it. 87222. Start your message with the word talk. Here's the voice again.
This is so interesting.
It's so interesting. But who says it? Whose voice is it? Lines are open. We will, if we get a correct answer, we're going to reveal all on the other side of the news at 3, as I'm sure you know by now. If we don't, it rolls over to day 14. The last one we did was a record. It went for 22 21 days or something like that. 21, 22, 5,000 days, I don't know, 6 years, who knows? It seemed to wang on forever, for goodness sake. Let's go to your calls and comments as well. This one comes from Paul in South Shields, who says, if Lucy had stated names, time and location, then I would agree with a sentence, but voicing an opinion, no matter what the content, should not carry any sort of prosecution. Maybe, but that would require a change in the law, of course, because it would be reasonably suggested that the kind of time would have been any time. There was certainly a rough location. And it set itself alongside other tweets of a similar nature, which I think was part and parcel of the thinking. But whether it should there be any prosecution, jail time is another issue. Another one here, the punishment should be relative to the crime in respect of Lucy Connelly. While what she wrote was clearly wrong, I believe to have been given a prison sentence is disgraceful. We all say things sometimes that we regret, as shown by her deleting it 4 hours later. But we are all humans, and emotions and anger can run high. It's always those of us on the right who are censored, and a blind eye is turned to anything from people on the left. I've got a 5-year-old daughter. We talk about whether to emigrate abroad. I fear so much for her growing up in this country. And what we've got now, of course, thank you for that. I don't know, I can't name check it because there's no name given. But we've now got this curious situation. We've got to learn how we apply the digital world to existing rules, because there are distinctions here, and people do fire off the hip in a way they might not do. Now, some would say, well, in the digital world, it's even worse because you had time to think about it and you actually wrote. You didn't just say it out loud and then go, oh, shouldn't have said that. You sat down and typed it. Is that worse? I think people have a divide between who they're talking to as well. I think if people sense, oh, this is almost like a WhatsApp group. Some people see social media like they're not really thinking beyond the limits of their own followers or people that know them. Not imagining that a man in Wyoming or Sydney is going to read their tweet within the next 2 minutes. I mean, that's the bizarre nature of social media. Peter's in Dorset. Back to David Lammy in Israel and the like. What are your thoughts, Peter? Afternoon to you.
Hello, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
David Lammy is castigating, along with the French and the Canadians, but along with the French as well, the state of Israel. Now, people need to see the situation in its perspective. Israel has been fighting the Arabs for 80 years.
Yeah.
It has a population that doesn't even amount to the size of Greater London. It is fighting for its very survival every single day of the week. Every single shop, every single public area in Israel has got security on it. Do we live like that? Do you know anybody else in the world who's living like that?
Yeah.
No. And the situation is that the Arabs, yes, they are a huge population, and they could pull the plug out of the whole Middle Eastern situation tomorrow. But it doesn't suit them. And the fact of the matter is that they cannot see the wood from the trees. You have a little country the size of Wales in the middle of the Middle East, with unbelievable technology and drive. And you have a massive population surrounding this little country the size of Wales, with God knows how much money. And if anybody had half a clue, they could all bang their heads together very quickly and have an unbelievable trading bloc that no one in the world would ever believe. And they cannot see the wood from the trees, but it suits them to keep bombing Israel, to keep getting people to bomb Israel. 10 million people. People need to understand, after 6 million wiped out in the Second World War, that in the whole world, there's only about 20 million Jewish people, including the state of Israel.
Yeah.
People need to get a grip. And in my view, the castigation going on by David Lammy on Israel is bordering, in the way he talks, is bordering on racist. And he needs to be ashamed of himself. He is somebody who surely understands the word racism. He has the colour of his skin. There is so much talked about how black people get affected by racism. And he's probably, and everybody else is probably absolutely correct. It is disgusting the way people of any colour, any faith, are castigated. And
so in that respect, he should know better, for that reason and many others, of course. And you rightly say, and I said at the beginning of all of this, when we started talking about it, Peter, that it sounded to me like Lammy was in his perfect skin when he was talking about that yesterday, politically speaking, that he felt comfortable castigating and saying, you know, very passionate words and condemnation to Israel. That was who David Lammy is. That's his politics. That's what the hymn sheet he sings from, and I include Keir Starmer in that as well. David Lammy happens to be the Foreign Secretary who made the more detailed statement, but Keir Starmer similarly. That's really the hymn sheet from which they sing. Peter, I've got to stop there. Thank you. Don't go away, Nigel. I am going to be with you shortly, because there's a lot to be said on this. There's everything from the very serious stuff to the English Channel migrant dog, whose identity we have chosen to protect, as you will be noticing. There's a lot to say on that as well. Details on the way on the other side of the news. 0344 499 1000. Treacle says maybe the dog is a therapy dog for the person who dragged him along. Poor dog. And how come he doesn't have to go into quarantine? No, apparently he is. Treacle's in Bridgend. Apparently he is in quarantine because it could be a manky old dog with fleas, maybe rabies and stuff like that. Maybe it's got a drop of COVID thrown in there. It's going to start a whole new pandemic. So last thing you need is canine COVID, the worst kind of COVID. So they've stuck it in the pound to give it some tests. This is the voice of doom. Have a listen.
This is so interesting.
Who is that? Have we got an answer? Find out next.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
minutes after 3 o'clock. Welcome back to the home of Common Sense. Welcome back to the programme. So Keir Starmer has condemned Israel's renewed Gaza offensive as completely wrong as Britain's trade talks, halts trade talks and summons the ambassador. Meanwhile, Foreign Secretary David Lammy has called this intolerable, abominable and morally unjustifiable. Lammy was very comfortable in this condemnation in the House of Commons yesterday. We'll have more on that in a few moments. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister has signalled a U-turn on plans to scrap winter fuel payments for 10 million pensioners, saying he's now, quote, looking at ditching the cuts following a furious public backlash. He gave us some old tripe about, well, the economy's in better nick, we can afford it now. No, this was a U-turn because this policy was going to hang around their necks right up to the next election. And ITV is shaking up its daytime schedule and productions for Good Morning Britain, Lorraine and Loose Women, along with This Morning, with around 220 people, including presenters and staff, set to lose their jobs. We'll talk to our friends at The Sun on this as to what is going on. Carnage over there at ITV Daytime. What's behind the story? Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk 0344 499 1000. Let's do the voice of doom before we get into our next story. This, of course, is a voice that's gone on for 14 days now. Very simple task. It's a mystery voice. You've got to identify who it is. It's always politically related. The clues that I've given you so far is that you are looking for a former Labour cabinet minister. Here's the voice.
This is so interesting.
Who is that? These are some of the answers. Sean Woodward, no. Alistair Darling, no. Liam Byrne, it is not. James Purnell, who legged it to the BBC, of course. No, it's not him. Dennis Healy, no. Jack Cunningham, is it Dr. Jack Cunningham, remember him? No, it's not him. Angela Rayner, it's not him either. James Purnell, again, it's not him. Liam Byrne, again, it's not him. Jeff Hoon, it's not him. There's a lot of similar answers here. No one has got it right, though, which means it rolls over to tomorrow. Can we hear it again, Amy?
This is so interesting.
That's the voice. It isn't that... Oh, I'll give you another clue tomorrow, OK? I'll give you another clue. You're not looking for the most high profile of former cabinet ministers, OK? I can tell you that much. Oh, the other one I gave you is he has appeared on this show quite recently. And he's been on maybe 3 times over the last few years. Coming up on 5 minutes after 3 o'clock, let's move to this story. And, of course, we are talking about Israel. Britain has suspended trade talks with Israel and is prepared to impose sanctions on senior officials over what it calls intolerable military action in Gaza. Foreign Secretary David Lammy condemned monstrous, that's a quote, calls from Israeli ministers to cleanse Gaza, calling them repellent and extremist. Meanwhile, Keir Starmer said he was really appalled, calling Israel's latest offensive completely wrong and warning that it risked breaching international law and declaring the world will not tolerate any more excuses. In a moment, we'll speak to Ashok Kumar, Associate Professor at Birkbeck University, who helps us out with these kind of issues from time to time. First, Jotam Confino, Israel correspondent at The Telegraph, joins us live, who's in Israel at the moment. Good afternoon to you, Jotam.
Good afternoon, Ian.
Nice to have you with us, sir. I mean, these were very strong words from the Foreign Secretary. I have to say, journalistically, I was quite surprised that the use of such words in this context, bearing in mind we always talk about the language of diplomacy. Seemed that there were many people on the Labour backbenches who were very pleased to hear both Mr Starmer, but particularly the Foreign Secretary, speak in this tone. But were you surprised with the kind of the nature of how he chose to impart this latest bit of government policy?
Not really, because if you look at what Israel has been doing in at least a couple of months now, they've really just isolated themselves, and they're begging for it, really. The whole idea of blocking off aid in the way that they've done now, everyone knew that eventually Israel's allies are going to say enough. They've already, threatened with this many times in the past 19 months. Every time Israel cut off aid, or if not enough aid came in, or too many people were killed. So I'm not really surprised, because it was just a long time coming. Israel's government has not done itself any favors by, first of all, having security cabinet ministers saying the most vile things you can imagine. Now, granted, and many of those statements are just statements. They're not actually put into action, but it doesn't matter. If you're a cabinet minister and you have some influence over the war and you basically call for ethnic cleansing, your allies, Western allies, cannot back you. It's as simple as that. So Netanyahu is single-handedly, I would say, managing to isolate Israel when it doesn't have to be this way.
Is this,
in my opinion,
I was just going to say, Josh, is this really to appease? I mean, he's got some fairly right-wing hawks. I mean, he's a fairly right-wing character himself, but within his own, there are people who are further down that political spectrum than him. Is he trying to appease those people, or is this something more simpler than that? I mean, many would say, well, actually, you know, Hamas and many in Gaza want the eradication of Israel. What is he supposed to do in this situation? They would like to see the eradication of the state, of every Jew. They've said it out loud. There's been many comments that some would argue far worse than anything Netanyahu has said about the other side, that they have said very publicly. They would also argue, of course, that this could stop if Hamas just released all the hostages. They're not without a level of defence here.
No, not at all. I think we have to differentiate between the legitimacy of Israel's right to absolutely go into Gaza and hunt down every member of Hamas and any other terror group. We have to differentiate between that and then blocking off aid. Those two things are different in my book. And I think most of Israel's allies would be able to continue to back Israel if they hadn't blocked off aid. Israel is not really punishing Hamas by blocking off aid. Hamas has already stolen so much aid when Israel flooded Gaza with aid in the last ceasefire. 25,000 trucks with aid came in. They made sure, take a lot of aid, stock it up because they knew that war was coming. So Hamas is not suffering from this blockade. It's stupidity, really, from the Israeli government to think that this is a way to punish Hamas. They're punishing the civilians, and when you punish the civilians, your allies will turn against you. It's as simple as that.
Yeah. What do you make of reports coming out that 14,000 babies could die over the next 48 hours? And I did say at the beginning when I read that headline that, you know, there is a lack of qualification and sourcing of that information, but it's certainly that seems to be making global headlines at the moment.
You're saying it exactly. It's making global headlines. Look, I've covered this war from the second that October 7th outbreak happened at 6:30 in the morning on basically until now. I cannot count the amount of times that I've seen unfounded claims coming out of Gaza. This is particularly bad because it's such an insane announcement or prediction that you have to back it up with something, and they couldn't. So the UN spokesperson had to go and say, look, I'm actually referring to a report that said that within 11 months, thousands of babies could die from malnutrition. There's a huge difference between 48 hours and 11 months, and they had to basically walk it back. It was BBC that asked them this question. I'm just really, really tired of the lack of journalistic integrity when it comes to what happens inside Gaza because people feel sorry for the Palestinians. I think most people feel sorry for the civilians, but it can't just remove our journalistic standards and take everything that's coming from either NGOs or from Hamas's health ministry and just spray it out as headlines. It's very, very tiring.
Yeah, I think if ever there is a time when journalism has been under scrutiny, then it's absolutely right now for and for the very reasons you've just given. In terms of aid, Jotam, what do we know about what might be happening then over the next 48 hours? There's been a problem getting aid through. Is that being addressed? Is there a deliberate attempt to stop it? What are you hearing on the ground there in Israel?
So a couple of things. The World Food Program just said that the aid that came in yesterday, some 93 trucks that passed the border into Gaza, it is finally reaching them and they're about to distribute it. So that's very good news. 93 trucks is not a lot, but it's something, you know, to at least address the most acute problems. If Netanyahu is smart, he will just begin letting aid come into Gaza as quickly as possible because, frankly, it's the only thing that can really help the situation inside Gaza. And for Israel, it's the only thing that can make the UK, France, and Canada walk back their threats on sanctions. So I believe we will see more aid already coming this week.
And in terms of, journalistically, this line gets used a lot. If Hamas released all the hostages, the war would stop. Is that true or false?
That's false, because Israel cannot go back to October the 6th and say, all right, we have our hostages now, and we will accept Hamas being in power. Hamas has said many times they want to eradicate the state of Israel, and they will launch many more October the 7th. Now, which country on earth would allow to have a neighbor that continues to be your neighbor when they have this goal? It's absurd. On 9/11, most of the Western world rallied behind the United States to launch a war thousands of kilometers away for decades against a relatively small terror group. Hamas is at a completely different level. They control an area which is small, but they've embedded themselves in every level of infrastructure. So if Israel does not get rid of Hamas, if they don't lay down their weapons, we are just basically on a countdown to the next massacre and the next Gaza war.
And is there any way around this? I mean, we've had lots of comments and calls this afternoon on people making comparisons about any war. Dresden was mentioned. The Brits back in the 40s didn't say, well, we better not bomb this place because there are families living there. Sadly, there is a collateral damage, and nobody likes that, and we try to almost not think about it too much. But, nobody would have said we shouldn't go in to defeat fascism because of that. We understood the uncomfortable and sometimes horrific nature of it. Israel could be argued in exactly the same position. They don't have ill intent towards the average family, but they've got to get rid of Hamas the best they can. What options are there?
So the only option for Israel, and they should have done that a long time ago, but is to come up with a plan as to who should take over from Gaza inside Gaza. Who should take over? They haven't done that because Israel refuses to allow the Palestinian Authority to take control, which is what most of the world would like to happen. So which other entity do you want? They haven't come up with a solution. If you don't have a political solution, you cannot militarily defeat Hamas because they'll keep popping up from tunnels or whatnot, and Israel will have to be there to fight them. They should have another entity armed that can take care of Hamas once and for all. It could be a multinational entity. I don't know, but there just has to be a solution to this.
On a slightly lighter note in this dark story, I suppose you could argue Donald Trump had a solution, but it involved casinos, right?
Yeah. I'm sorry I'm laughing. It's just because it sounds so absurd because he's living in a monopoly world where he thinks that he can jump from one place to the next and make a deal. Yeah. And then everything is solved. The world is not a real estate market. Not all of it, at least. Indeed. And Gaza certainly isn't.
Spot on. Listen, Jotam, thank you very much indeed for your time, sir. Appreciate that. That's Jotam Konfino, Israel correspondent at The Telegraph, live in Israel. Let's get a word from Ashok Kumar, Associate Professor, Birkbeck University. Ashok, good afternoon to you. I mean, there would be some elements of what Jotam just said that you may well concur with. Certainly at the beginning, he was talking about, Israel have only got themselves to blame for being somewhat isolated when you have the British who've been, pretty much shoulder to shoulder through most of this. Yesterday, a complete reversal on that. David Lammy talking about this being intolerable, talking about it being extremism. What's your reaction?
Well, I don't think it was a complete reversal at all. I think there's been 19 months, a brutal occupation, a brutal genocide, and there's estimates of hundreds of thousands of people that have been killed. We just haven't been able to get those numbers out properly because no journalists have been allowed in, and they've killed more journalists. Israel's killed more journalists than World War I, World War II, Vietnam, Iraq War, all combined in this short period of time. The thing that Lammy spoke so passionately and so bombastically about was the same tenor and tone that he gave days after October 7th when he said Israel had a right, just like Starmer, had a right to cut off water, food, and electricity, which is a war crime, and has continued to arm Israel. It just came out 2 weeks ago. The Palestinian Youth Movement's research proved, and it was covered in a number of outlets, including The Guardian, proved that the government was lying and continuing to supply weapons, offensive weapons, contrary to their claims. And just yesterday, they ran reconnaissance trips, which declassified the investigative journalists there have proven over and over again they're running reconnaissance trips over Gaza and providing that information to Israel, despite the fact that British citizens have been killed in Gaza by Israel and want to get those surveillance images to prove how it was done, the British government has refused to do that. So these are words, symbolic words, diplomacy, these kinds of things only matter if the opponent, in this case Israel, cares about international law. There's an ICC arrest warrant out for the leaders of Israel. They are war criminals, and they don't care about diplomacy.
And Hamas, for that matter.
Well, they've already killed the people whose leaders they had out for Hamas, so that doesn't really apply. What are they going to find the cadaver?
You take the broader point. They weren't taking sides on this, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, they were saying war crimes were committed by Israel, and they're still alive. There's no arrest warrant out anymore for the leaders of Hamas because Israel killed them.
But isn't the ultimate problem here, Ashok, is that Israel is a democratically elected first world country that is having a battle with a medieval death cult that wants to eradicate Jews and Israel. And that is ultimately what this comes back to. We can talk about all sorts of facts and figures that you might bring up, some of them, I'm sure quite a lot of them, unsourced, but nonetheless, you're allowed that opinion. But ultimately, that's what this is, isn't it? It's a battle between ideologies.
Let's take that apart. You say first world, that doesn't really mean anything. What you mean is probably they look European. Is that what you mean? The second point is democratic.
No, I mean democracy. You have elections, you have equal rights, that kind of thing.
No, there's no equal rights. It's an apartheid state. It's been recognized in 73 resolutions of the UN and by international organizations, including Human Rights Watch and Amnesty, within the 48 borders. If you take 67, the ICJ judgment, which is the Supreme Court of the world, it's the highest court in the world, came to the judgment last summer that the occupation in the West Bank and in Gaza is illegal. So there's no democratic rights there, and they occupy them. There's been no elections allowed for the Palestinian Authority or or for Gaza for that matter. They've enforced the fact that they can't have democratic elections. So
you think Hamas is more democratic than Israel? Then,
that's not the point. You're saying it's a democratic country, and I'm trying to contest that.
Well, Israel is a democratic country. You vote for its government, right? You vote for its government.
Absolutely not. Areas that they occupy don't have rights. They're under the authority and under the occupation and the military rule.
Okay.
And they can be arrested and they can be thrown into a jail without any accusations and any guilty plea.
But who are you talking about? You're not. Who are you talking about? All right, you're talking about Palestinians whose status is yet to be settled.
No, Ian, I just really want you to understand this a little bit. I'm not making opinions here. I'm citing court judgments.
I hear what you're saying.
You're citing random sort of ad hominem. It's not a death cult. Israel is the death cult. You've just seen...
Hamas is not a death cult. Hamas is not a death cult.
No, it's not a death cult.
You can't really believe that. It's recognized across the world as a terrorist organization.
It's not. It's recognized by 12 countries as a terrorist organization.
Yeah, and you know which countries they are, right?
It's very important for you to make claims and back that up, because I'm looking out for you, Ian. On other issues, you've been very... No, 12 countries. 25 countries don't recognize...
Listen, you're a bright guy. I love your intellectual thinking. I know all of that. That doesn't make you right on everything.
No, Ian,
it doesn't mean you're not missing the point.
25 countries in the world do not recognize Israel. 12 countries recognize Hamas as a terrorist organization.
Yeah.
So your position is in the minority.
Who are the countries? Well, I don't think the league table quite works like that, does it?
Well, how does it work? You said the entire world, and I'm disproving categorically your statement.
Okay, so you think most Western countries...
Why do I care about... You said most of the world. Why is it only Western countries matter?
Well,
you said the world.
Yes.
So do African countries not matter?
Well, of course African countries matter.
Do Latin American? So they recognize...
Some have a very different view to you.
They don't. They recognize the country that is eviscerating people every day for the last 19 months, incinerating babies as they sleep, and have said...
And we hear the same. We hear the same stories.
They want to drive
way.
them out.
And we hear the same story.
No,
yes, we do. Literally, on this program today, somebody talked about cooking, but Hamas cooking babies. I mean, I literally heard the same line in reverse.
But there's no evidence of that. They have journalists. They could have proven that in Gaza. We have the images coming out, even though they haven't allowed any journalists. You're a journalist, Ian. Why don't you ever ask, why doesn't Israel allow journalists into Gaza? Why
I
do you
would
ask that
absolutely.
question?
Well, I think there's many reasons that they might come
Like
up with.
the so-called journalist that you just had on here, sitting on his gated community terrace in Israel, saying, "I've been doing this story since October 7th." He's a client journalist. He hasn't even been into Israel. You didn't even into Gaza.
Well, that doesn't make him a client journalist. I mean, that's just a pejorative, right?
No, it's not.
It is. And he started off with a criticism of Israel.
He's disproving something that's coming out of Gaza without any evidence to prove that he's like, as a journalist that's been covering this. How do we know that? You're sitting in somewhere in Tel Aviv.
What? So that he's not? You're saying he's not covering it, or you don't believe he's covering it thoroughly enough?
He has no evidence to disprove it.
Okay,
he's just saying, as a journalist, it's important that people have some evidence, that they go into the field.
He was also talking. He was talking about sloppy journalism as well. He acknowledged that there is some terrible reporting.
Yes. There is terrible reporting. And the fact is that journalists on the ground have been killed in the largest numbers since records were taken. And so anytime any statement, even though if we have video evidence proving that people are being burned alive and being killed en masse, and there's tens of thousands of amputations, you can just say, who's reporting that? Oh, it's Hamas.
Yeah.
Well, are there journalists? Oh, no, the journalists are Hamas. And they don't allow journalists.
I mean, you kind of get a flavour, really, of Hamas on what happened on October the 7th. And, of course, we could go back and we could go present. We could find a whole load of examples of, the barbarity that we are discussing. It shouldn't be a league table. Nobody is defending the horrendous treatment of anybody in this, but we do have to acknowledge that it's a war. And I don't think it's unreasonable to look at the wider picture and say, how do we want this to come out?
No,
how would that region look more peaceful? With Hamas or with Israel?
This is what I find amusing. When Palestinians defend themselves, we say they're terrorists. When Israel murders tens of thousands of civilians and admits to it, they just came out 2 days ago and said 80% they know to be civilians, and that's a conservative estimate. We say, oh, it's a war. It's a war. So do you see how the bait and switch works? How is that a war? We only can go on international law. And international law says it very clearly. The additional protocols of the Geneva Convention and the UN core conventions say that occupied people have a right to resist, even if it includes arms. The occupier has no right to defend the occupation. So what you're doing is contrary to international law. If not, it's just emotions. I'm using international law and you're using emotions. That's the distinction.
Listen, Ashok, it's always good to get your take on these things. Ashok Kumar, he is Associate Professor, Birkbeck University, very much in a different place to our previous guest and many others for that matter. Your thoughts on this, 0344 499 1000.
Yeah, another sign of the sort of epidemic of shoplifting across the country. Remember, in England and Wales last year, there were 516,000 offences reported to police. So that doesn't include all the shop theft crimes that go unreported, 516,000. That was up 20% in a year. And what Greggs has done, because it's so concerned about this problem, is that it's ditching self-service fridges. So, you know, those fridges that you just
literally you open the fridge, you take the sandwich.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
A little bit of breaking news reference. Tommy Robinson, real name Stephen Yaxley Lennon, has been charged with harassment causing fear of violence against two men in August last year. This is from the Crown Prosecution Service. This comes, of course, after that announcement yesterday that he's likely to be released from his contempt sentence within the next week. That, I would assume, still applies. This is a separate thing altogether, but we'll bring you any more, if you're really interested in it, as it breaks. But there it is. He's been charged with harassment causing fear of violence against two men in August last year, according to the CPS. Mega says no Israeli leader has been found guilty of war crimes. It's libel to call them war criminals. Well, of course, our guest, Mega, would say, well, that's because they haven't been arrested and taken to court. That would be his answer on that. Amazing response from you on the last guest. Please ask him, how is breaking into Israel and slaughtering 1,400 unarmed civilians, this is from Lady Anne, including pregnant women and babies, defending yourself? You should not have let him get away with that, Ian. Appalling. It was appalling. I mean, he said a lot of appalling things. He said a lot of things I disagree with. So according to pro-Hamas, says Just Me, if another country occupies your country, you are legally entitled to arm and defend it. Can I arm myself to defend England against Channel illegals? Ashok is talking utter nonsense, says Steve. Philip, however, says, this is funny. Collins given a right royal thrashing and reduced to the tactics of constant interrupting in an attempt to filibuster. It was an attempt to get him to answer a question, actually. This one comes in from Sadie. Please get this joker, Ashok, off the screen. He's revolting. And Up in the Hills says, how can these people say the war with Gaza is a genocide? No, that's what October the 7th was, courtesy of Palestinian Hamas. And that's a very accurate way to look at it. I said very much at the beginning of the programme, in fact, I opened up with these words. I said, I've done these debates on Israel and surrounding areas, namely the West Bank, Hamas and Gaza and the like. Done these debates for years. There is rarely a compromise on this debate in 25 odd years. I've never encountered any other area that does this so reassuringly in terms of you know what's going to happen, because it's never changed. And you get two people on who are expert views, but one's an expert in Gaza, for example, one's an expert in Israel, and they're both looking at all the same issues. They're both looking at the same pressures, the same politics. They're looking at the same stories, the same timelines. They're looking at the same administrations, the same global considerations, the same scriptures, and yet two completely different views. Two completely different views. And that never really changes. And ultimately, it seems to, I don't know whether it comes down to just religion. I speak as a Westerner, and therefore my skin in this game is that I'm a big supporter of democracy and equality and fairness and all the things that most Western countries don't always get it right, by the way. We know they don't always get it right. We know there are examples where it sometimes goes skew-if. But broadly speaking, on balance, would I like to live my life under the likes of Hamas or ISIS? Would my life be immeasurably improved if that was the regime I lived under? And I don't want to play any silly games here by kind of pretending, well, you have to understand that some people like... No is the answer in any shape or form. What we got here is not perfect, all right? But I do believe it is better than any other system that I can see out there. I think it's not just better, I think it's demonstrably better. I think individuals, you don't get anybody escape the West to go and live in some in Lebanon, for example. Nobody legged it to Lebanon. They might have worked there at some, government, in some government capacity. But you get people leg it from those regions to come to the West. It's funny that I rarely go back either, for that matter. Nobody goes, I tried out, living in New York or Paris or London, but then I suddenly realised that life was so much better and fairer in Baghdad. No one ever did that. There's a bit of evidence there, I think, more than just anecdotal. 0344 499 1000. Back with it, back with more comment from you. Coming next on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk, 25 to 4. So over there, what is going on over there at ITV, for goodness sake? They're overhauling their daytime schedule, cutting back on shows like Lorraine. Don't take our Lorraine. Loose Women, around 220 staff facing job losses. The reshuffle comes amid a desperate cost-cutting drive as millions switch to catch-up, streaming and YouTube over live TV. Bosses say the cuts will help strengthen other parts of the channel, including new drama and sport. Let's speak with Felicity Cross, who's Deputy TV Editor over there at our friends at The Sun, just a few floors down from us. Good to see you, Felicity.
And good to see you as well.
What is
sad
going
news.
on? Sad news.
Yeah.
I mean, Loose Women. I've known a few of the girls that have worked on Loose Women over the years, from Carol to Jane, and you do in this industry, as you know. And I didn't realise there was quite a there's such a big subs bench of Loose Women. There's about 30 of them or something.
Yeah, there is. And I think this is why everyone is so shocked by what's gone on, because what we're hearing is this came as a complete surprise to almost everybody.
Yeah.
So everyone knew that ITV is under the cosh and they need to save some money. They've already swung the axe on some of the soaps, and so daytime was always going to be next, but no one knew it would be quite so savage. So as you've heard already, the schedule is the first place where the cuts have been made. So Lorraine has been shortened by 30 minutes, and then GMB has been extended, but they've done that by grouping together a whole load of the backstage staff, so the production crew. But I think where we're most worried about it is on Loose Women, as you say, because there's this huge cast.
I mean, I haven't slept.
It's kept you up all night.
It has. And you've got the huge cast.
Yes. So Loose Women will now only air for 30 weeks of the year.
Okay.
And that means that they're losing about 100 episodes.
Okay.
Now, if you think of this almost like a football team, there's less games being played, there's less of them needed, which means that some of them are surely not going to get those shifts. They're all going to be fighting for their place on that panel now. And they all feel like they're going to be on there singing for their supper. They think that the bosses bosses are going to be scrutinising their every tweet. You know, any scandal, no more scandal, no more drama. They're all going to be there fighting for their life, really, fighting for that work, because there's too many of them for not enough shifts, and that's the real problem here.
That's going to be the problem. So if you are one of the kind of, I mean, there is a pecking order. There's the regulars that are on there all the time, and then there are others that, you know, pop up once in a while. Denise is a regular. I can't imagine she's going to be off the...
No, there's real favourites, and obviously there's the presenters, as they call them, as well as the panellists. So that's Kay Adams, Charlene White, Christine Lampard. They'll be fine. And then there's the favourites like Denise Welch, Gloria Hunniford. She'll probably be okay. But then there's this sort of...
Don't touch my glow.
Do not go for her.
Do not go for her. She lives near me as well. So, yeah, I've seen... you know, when I wanted to get into radio years ago, I wrote to her show on Radio 2 to sit in on her show. And they said yes.
Did she say yes, or her team?
Well, her team said yes. And I remember coming out the lift at the BBC with a security guard who took me up there. And he went, "Yes, Gloria Hunniford over there, mate." And he just left me with her. I was like 15 or something, thinking, oh my God, I'm with Gloria Hunniford. She's been around forever, of course. She is a bit of a treasure. So there's all these names. 30 weeks a year, there will be Loose Women. What happens for the other 22 weeks, then? What do they put on in its place?
Yeah, so this is the thing. They're going to shuffle the schedule. There'll be different daytime shows pulled in.
Yeah.
They're calling it seasonal. So some will draw forward in the schedule and some won't. Good Morning Britain, in some instances, will be extended to cover. So we're going to get more and more of Good Morning Britain, and that harks back to the fact that they've now merged with ITV News. So we're going to get a much newsier GMB, because they think that's what people want. But I don't know about you, people love Loose Women, and they love Lorraine. They love that chattiness. There's a lot of lonely people that really like welcoming them into their home every day. They want soft topics as well as kind of that
as well as
stuff.
the hard stuff. Because originally this was, of course, to sort of replicate The View, wasn't it, in the States? That was sort of the idea.
Yeah.
But it's found its own identity. The View is a little bit more, you know, they'll have Barack Obama on there and things like that. It gets a bit more feisty. I don't know if Whoopi Goldberg's still on there, but she could start a row in a room on her own, couldn't she?
Absolutely.
So it's a little different in that respect. Ours has been a bit softer with Loose Women. Whether it's someone's idea of what they want to watch is irrelevant. The fact is, it's been very popular.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing as well. Loose Women, in recent years, has been doing incredibly well, ratings-wise, and also awards. It's been up for a TV BAFTA. It won an RTS award, like prestigious stuff. Lorraine as well has been doing really well with its campaigns, no buts on bowel cancer and the Check and Change Choir. Both of them are really sort of punching above their weight. And then you've got the likes of This Morning, on the other hand, which is losing viewers, has obviously been incredibly controversial, bad headlines after all the row over Phil and Holly, and people are thinking, why isn't This Morning being touched? So that's been entirely unscathed by this, and people think, why are they the favourites? And there's these 4 shows, ITV's big hallmark shows, staples of the schedule, and there's now almost this civil war happening at ITV, where everyone's thinking, why them, why us, and what about my job?
It's interesting you mentioned This Morning, because This Morning's been on for so long. I mean, we're different ages. I'm probably, you know, a couple of weeks older than you. So... not funny. But This Morning seems to have been on since I was alive. I mean, it's been on forever. When Richard and Judy used to do it, I remember as a student, there it was on the TV. It was always there. But it does feel like maybe the kind of Holly Phil thing was the time to possibly change things. And they've got some good presenters. I'm not doubting, you know, Kat Deely and Ben and, you know, anyone else that's on there. But it does feel a little bit like, what else do we do with this? There's so many features. You can bring the doctor on, or the cook on, or the, you know, I don't know, the catwalk.
Yeah, exactly. So people are just sort of thinking, does all of this spell the death of daytime telly? You know, the fact that they're making these cuts to it for the sake of drama and sport, you know, ITV will have huge audience data to look at. At the end of the day, it all comes back to money, doesn't it? So they're probably looking at where are the advertisers spending their money. Maybe they're not doing it on daytime anymore.
It could be that, and it's interesting we mentioned about, you know, audiences are finding different ways of watching TV. My little boy, who's 11, if I said to him, he wouldn't know the word ITV. He wouldn't know the word Channel 4. He just knows programmes. So wherever they might be. They're likely to be on YouTube, they're likely to be on Netflix or Disney or wherever. They might be on iPlayer, they might be on ITV Player, but he wouldn't recognise the brand in that respect.
Yeah.
And that's the big change, isn't it?
No,
Because,
absolutely.
You know, and they also don't, kids don't talk about what side is it on. You know, watching TV, so what side's that on? You know, what side? What side? What channel is that? You know, I don't do channels. I just know what I want to watch, and I go on a computer and I press it in.
Yeah, and they're all watching on YouTube and that kind of thing, which is another thing that's happening on Loose Women, of almost the factions between the old guard and the newer names who are shiny and new, and the teachers' pets. And, you know, they're bringing with them this exciting new YouTube, TikTok type audience, because they've got GK Barry. Don't know if you know of her work.
Of course I know GK Barry, because she, of course, was in The Jungle.
Exactly, and that was ITV's clever move to introduce her to the older audiences and that family.
And she was a
set at
TikToker,
home.
that's where she sort of began, right?
Exactly,
So,
and now she's a Loose Woman. So, you know, there's all of these swirling tensions going on, and they're all just, you know, fighting for their jobs, fighting for their space on that panel. But what I think is, you know, what does it mean for your listeners, our readers? Is it going to mean better telly? Or is it going to mean that they're losing what they love? And I fear it might be the latter.
Do you know what? I've got to say this. Over there at The Sun, showbiz and TV, bizarre column, whatever it happens at 3, you know, all these different areas that have been, you know, amazingly notable over the years. But there is one story you have missed on your floor.
Oh, no.
And that is a new programme that might be starting in a week or so called Loose Men.
Yes.
I mean, so you're already laughing at this, Felicity.
Well, you know, there is already Loose Men.
Is there?
Where? Sorry to hit you with facts here.
Oh, for goodness sake.
Once a month, Loose Women do Loose Men.
Do they really?
Yeah.
Do they call it Loose Men?
Yeah, they do.
No, they don't.
I've ruined your joke.
Well, no, I was actually half serious, because we used to do a thing here called The Talk, if you remember.
I do.
You know, when we were doing the sort of TV stuff.
Yeah.
Although that was a mixture of, Sharon Osbourne was with us, Mike Graham and Kevin and goodness knows who else. That was such a great format. It was so good to do. We can all see the attraction of the kind of, you know, multi-panelled sort of programme.
Defo.
But we need the daily Loose Men. I didn't know about the monthly thing, but now you've told me that. That sort of almost accelerates the proposal, because Finn and Adam, our producers, are writing it up at the moment.
They're desperate for it. Yeah, well, I mean, I think it goes back to, you know, people are sat at home, quite a lot of people are lonely, everyone has opinions, and that kind of forum for sharing and, you know, being heard, everyone wants it, don't they?
I think as well. Yeah, and I mean, years ago it was unusual to see, like everything's opinions now, isn't it? Wherever you go, it's opinions.
Yeah.
Opinions, there's social media, it's about opinions.
Yeah.
You know, do you agree this side, that side? Have you got another view? Could be TikTok, could be YouTube, could be could be here where we deal in opinions. Sun readers love opinionated columnists and ideas, whoever that happens to be, whether it's Rod or Jane or whoever. You know, there's lots of opinion out there. And Loose Women, you know, whether it's someone's cup of tea or not, it's certainly not short of those.
They're absolutely not shy of sharing them. But might they now be? Because they all want to be picked, don't they? Come January, when these changes come in, they don't want to be the one that caused a row with a out-of-touch opinion or any of that kind of thing. So are we going to see a watered-down Loose Women now?
What would that look like? Maybe it'd just be one of them. Loose Woman.
Loose woman who isn't loose anymore is very careful about everything she says.
Just doing a great monologue to camera. I quite like that idea.
Very snowflake friendly.
I had a tweet from Mike who says, can you find out who these hoodwinkers are that present Loose Men? It's a good question.
So you've got people, they're doing the same thing as with the Loose Women.
I can't wait for this list.
All ages.
Go
on. Recently we've had Sam Thompson.
Like Sam?
Yeah, reality boy turned jungle. Craig Doyle's been on.
Doyley.
Vernon Kay's been on.
Vernon's all right.
Yeah, so people like that. A little bit of everyone from all walks of life.
Okay.
Trying to sort of reflect that same Loose Women model. It's not bad.
But no one that looks like this. I think that's what you're saying.
No rival to your version.
Of course. As if that was even possible.
You'll have me on as a guest, right?
On a weekly basis. When we smash this schedule, we're going to do it.
I'll be your loose girl.
Absolutely. Listen, Felicity, great to see you. We'll let you get back to your floor, just down the road from us here at Talk Towers. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Felicity Cross with us, Deputy TV Editor over there at The Sun, talking Loose Women and beyond. More of that, of course, as we get it. Lots to talk about here. More calls from you on the way. This is Talk.
Yeah, another sign of the sort of epidemic of shoplifting across the country. Remember, in England and Wales last year, there were 516,000 offences reported to police. So that doesn't include all the shop theft crimes that go unreported. 516,000, that was up 20% in a year. And what Greggs has done, because it's so concerned about this problem, is that it's ditching self-service fridges. So, you know, those fridges that you just
literally, you open the fridge, you take the sandwich.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk 0344 499 1000 10 to 4. Let's go back to your calls. Jason joins us in Sheffield. How you doing, Jason?
Not too bad, how are you, mate?
Yeah, I'm all right. Good as gold at this end. What's going on?
That's all right. I was thinking about this David Lammy, Keir Starmer thing about Israel upping its military intervention in Gaza. Now, thinking back, I mean, you'll remember, when we had the 9/11 issue, when they flew planes into World Trade Center, can you, I mean, it may have happened, but I can't remember. Did we have thousands of people on the streets in London demonstrating against America not invading Afghanistan?
There was a Iraq war protest, of course, but you're right. I mean, broadly speaking, when that first happened, there was global sympathy for America, right?
Yeah, but not Afghanistan, which is what is happening now with Hamas. It's kind of, I'm going to take the Julia Hartley-Brewer view here.
Go on.
This is only happening because it's Israel.
And I think you're probably right. I think you're probably right. There's a gazillion injustices around, religion and oppression all over the world where we see absolutely nothing. You don't see anybody descending on the Chinese embassy or the Pakistani embassy and all manner. You never see it. You never see a protest in that respect. Where are those voices? Where are they? Where are those Palestinian marches when other atrocities, when Pakistan was kicking 1 million Muslims out of Pakistan and sending them back to war-torn Afghanistan? Absolutely nothing at all. Horrendous treatment of Uyghur Muslims in China. Nothing at all. No, this is about, it's because it's Israel. This is anti-Semitism. And that view, I'm not suggesting nobody is entitled to a view against Israel and their position in this war. If they want to have that view, they can do. I don't think I think you're right. I think that's the driver, which is why I sense that David Lammy and so many of those Labour MPs were very comfortable with this yesterday. They really, really were. They felt comfortable by being able to finally, they were unleashed to say what they really felt about Israel. That's how it felt to me. Jason, I've got to move for time. Thank you very much indeed for that. One here from Ian, who says the golden age of TV was probably Robin's Nest from the 1970s, when a cheeky chap running a bistro seemed very exotic. That was it the 70s or was it the 70s, really? Richard O'Sullivan, of course, Robin's Nest. Who else was in there? Tony Britton, I think, was his father-in-law. Tessa Wyatt was there as well. It was, and the Irish guy who was played one of the uncles in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory latterly. All sorts of characters around that time. But was it as good as the other one that Richard O'Sullivan used to be in, the other sitcom, the name of Man About the House? There you go. There was a proper 1970s. George and Mildred, Bless This House, Please Sir. There are others that are not allowed to be mentioned these days. Let's go back to Teresa in Angus. Teresa, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Very good, thanks. Nice to have you with us. You want to talk about sentencing?
Yeah, I know you've maybe passed over it now.
No, absolutely not. Fire away.
I've been listening with much interest about the Lucy Connelly thing.
Yeah.
And, we all know it's a ridiculous sentence. But, I know there are sentencing guidelines given out to judges all over the country, but sometimes I think, we've come on a bit. Do you not think we should maybe move on from judges and wigs and all that sort of thing? Because I just feel that judges have their own views, and we all have different views on things. We're all interested in different things and do things, and judges are the same. And sometimes I think maybe their own interests and maybe things that they feel about things that changes the sentence. Say if, for instance, just as an idea, knife crime. Right, if children knew that if they were caught on the streets with a knife, say 18-year-olds, obviously, they knew at that point it would be 2 years. And it would be 2 years. Now, would that not be more of a deterrent if they knew, if I'm caught, I'm going to get 2 years, I'm not going to get out of it, I'm not going to get out for good behaviour, that is the sentence. Because years ago, what happened, very sadly in my family, my daughter was abducted. She was only 18 at the time. And she was battered within an inch of her life.
Oh, dear.
Right? And she's had to live with that. She's now in nearly 40. But she's had to live with that. I've had to watch my daughter change. Now, the chap that did it, he was, because unfortunately he never actually broke a bone in her body, but her body was quite unrecognisable. But because there wasn't a broken bone in her body, the maximum sentence he could get was 2.5 years. Now,
really? For abduction and beating to that level?
Yes, and it's changed my daughter's life. It's changed our whole family's life.
Yeah.
But when I hear about Lucy Connelly, who just did a tweet, and I know what she said was wrong. It was wrong.
So she was sentenced to a longer period than the perpetrator of your daughter's attacker.
Yeah, he was sentenced 2.5 years, but he got out at 18 months.
Of course.
Now, that to me, there's no comparison in these crimes. No comparison at all. And that's what's going on in this country. And I think if they had, it was said, right, guys, we need to stop crime in this country because it is becoming out of control. And especially, I'm not being biased against our younger generation, but there is a lot of knife crime, as I keep going back to that. But if they knew, you're caught, you're 2 years, you don't get out, that's it.
Yeah.
Because it's just, they go in there and they're good boys or good girls and they're out very quickly. And then, as I've heard in your programme before, you get paedophiles who've done terrible things and they get 2 years. And that woman, it's just incredible the way our country's judicial system is run.
It is, it's another sickening reminder of imbalance, Teresa, and thank you for sharing that. I wish you lots of luck. Thank you for calling. That is Teresa in Angus. I said thank you for calling then, like I was the Argus call centre for a second. Thank you for calling. But a great call from Teresa. Thank you.
I think the Argos call centre probably only has one person, actually. She could have literally
She was actually in Angus
the Argos.
as well.
Oh, okay.
She's nearly Argos. Can't get a toaster in Angus, though. Not as quickly.
Right. Well, although in Angus, unlike Argos, they are all seeing.
Absolutely right.
Just a little classical reference
I
for
like
you there.
the classics references.
On a Wednesday afternoon.
Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
Peter Cardwell is here because after the news, it's Drive. It's going to be a busy show.
It is indeed. Starmer's U-turn. Why is he done it? Why is he doing it now? Yep. Is he going to get something back in this? Boris Johnson talking about us not being a country that is anything other than a police state. Does he have any right to say that? Also, fascinating story that's just emerged this afternoon about a flotilla commemorating the Dunkirk small boats. Well, they were told to divert. Why? Because there was a small boat with migrants coming across the channel. Yes. Wow. Really. Yes.
You can't make that up as a juxtaposition of
exactly
of issues.
Securing borders, for example, against tyranny. We will talk about that. Certainly, we'll also talk more about Israel. Has it gone beyond just self-defence? That is what the That is certainly what many people are saying, is with these attacks against Gaza and the humanitarian situation there. We'll talk as well about the sport. Obviously, it's a very, very big night tonight. Even I know that. Spurs versus Man United.
Even Peter Cogwell knows this.
Bilbao. I mean, it must be big. And, of course, lots more. Also, are you more likely to swipe right for a right-winger? Under 40s more open to dating Reform UK voters than Tories.
Really?
Yes.
Well, I used to know, I won't name the journalist, I would say a fairly, pretty left-wing journalist who worked at Parliament in a press capacity.